business? Do we have committee business? We don't have
Just quick, you have agendas on the table if you would like them. There's also a request early on about to get a budget for parole and probation specifically, so you have that handout. It is on Dropbox.
Sure.
And under committee business, did we have the agenda, or pardon me, the minutes from the previous meeting?
We did email out minutes for May 1st,
Okay.
so I don't know if the committee has had time to review those.
Has the committee had time to review the minutes from the previous meeting? Do we feel that we can vote on the minutes? Okay. Larry, you want to make a motion for me? Larry moves approval of the minutes from the previous meeting. Is there a second?
Second.
We have a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Okay. Approval of the minutes passes.
I'm just assuming that's with the changes that you may email out, right? Awesome.
Excellent point, yes. Approved as amended. Let's see. Then if we don't have any other committee business, anybody? Then we'll go ahead and move on to our first presenter, which is the district attorney. Welcome.
Good afternoon. I would like to start by saying I was at the governor's budget presentation today over at Trillium with all of the school superintendents, the mayor of Springfield, some business leaders, the chamber and all, and managed to get in front of the governor the leveraging of the $7.5 million to the $2.5 million in the PERS reserve and what that's going to mean for the county budget-wise. So, yay, good job.
We have to fund it now, too.
Right. Well, hopefully that will have impressed her enough to make that happen. So I'm just going to blow through the PowerPoint because you all are familiar with this so that you'll have time for questions at the end. But it also means that I need to know how to blow through the PowerPoint. Just push that. Okay. All right. So, well, it doesn't like that. Okay, so we have 4 divisions in the DA's office: the criminal division, which includes juvenile, family law, victim services, and the medical examiner. Our current budget changes, I've eliminated the chief deputy position in the DA's office so that we could add a lawyer to the major crimes team, which means that I now am doing 2 jobs. You're welcome. And but we really needed some assistance in getting the work done, and so that has really helped out in spreading the load on some of our most serious cases in the office. And thanks to the board, we are in the process of getting a grant-funded DUI investigator. As you all are aware, Lane County has a really high traffic fatality rate. We also have a very high DUI incidence. We don't have a lot of law enforcement presence on our roads, so it's really startling that we would be getting over 500 DUI cases a year in our office. And if you consider if we had a robust law enforcement presence, what that would mean. So we will have an investigator dedicated to doing the follow-up because DUI cases are getting so much more complicated to prosecute, particularly with the legalization of marijuana. We're seeing an increase in the number of DUI marijuana cases. We're all general fund. So I don't know if you want to spend any time looking at this. We get a lot of grant money in the DA's office to help support the functions of the office, particularly in victim services. We have 3 lawyers who are grant funded, 4 lawyers who are grant funded, and some support staff, investigator staff. Yes.
Federal revenues have been down over $500,000. State revenues are up 700,000. Local revenues are down 130,000.
So we're coming out at a wash.
Yeah, but any reason, particular reason why, say, federal revenues?
So the federal revenues, a lot of them pass through the state, through the Criminal Justice Commission. And so as,
So that makes sense. That's
yeah.
why state, so I'm good.
okay. But federal revenues are down. The contribution amount is down. So in our office, the largest driver is personnel, and that's pretty well known. We have, our lawyers are in bargaining right now, so that could increase our, well, it will increase our personnel cost. And then the AFSCME contract that was changed just this last year has caused some increase in personnel. But the bigger issue for us is the unknowns. You know, to prosecute a major, like a homicide, I just got a bill yesterday for $13,000 from a psychologist. So those are the things that are driving our M&S that we just can't predict or control. We also are getting charged for things we never used to get charged for, hospital records. We used to get those from the local hospitals. Now it's all outsourced and we have to pay for them. The big driver coming up in January or July 1 of 19 is going to be grand jury recordation. And while that's not in this fiscal budget, we need to start preparing for it before the July 1 budget. So far, the state has provided equipment to the 3 counties that are required to do that, and no other support or funding. And the money that has been not really dedicated, but talked about, the public defender services and all who testified at the legislature there would be no increase in costs are now putting their hands out saying, oh gosh, I guess there is going to be an increase in costs, and so we're going to need some of that.
You don't just push the record button?
No, that's the funny thing. It got pitched as you take your iPhone, put it in the middle of a table, and push record, and that's all it would take to record grand jury. Nobody bothered to think about why the court system requires a person to input what case it is, what part of the case, who's testifying, so that you can actually go back and retrieve the recording later. Right, but that was just one more gift from the legislature for us. Partnerships. We partner very well with all of Lane County in the public safety field because of the grants that we're receiving. We work with parole probation, the sheriff's office. The sheriff provides jail beds for our diversion from prison program, for treatment court. Parole and probation provides probation officers to help oversee the programs. We work with sponsors. The Sexual Assault on Campus grant partners us with Women's Space, SAS, not Women's Space, it's in that grant, Sexual Assault Services, the University of Oregon, the Eugene Police, the U of O PD, Peace Health for a Sane Nurse. We have lots of partners. This is the description of the criminal division. I think you all are pretty familiar with that. What you might not be aware of is how much we're required to do outside the area of criminal prosecution because statutes mandate that we do it. So we do public records appeals, and once the U of O was no longer part of DOJ's responsibility for public records appeals, our number of appeals went up with no additional funding. We do civil commitment hearings to assist the court as the public interest attorney with no additional funding. We handle expungements, the requests to not report as a sex offender any longer, and to get your driver's license reinstated after it's been permanently revoked. All of this, in the last few years, there's been a push through the legislature to allow for more expungements of criminal arrests and convictions, a reduction in the number of requirements for being registered sex offenders. So all of those motions are coming through our office. And currently, I have a retired lawyer doing it as extra help for a lot of these extra assignments because the lawyers who are working don't have time to do all these extra assignments. And so the criminal division is 47 FTE. The family law division is collecting about $21 million in child support and enforcing healthcare orders. It's done with 4 lawyers. It's really a marvel compared to what the state does in collection. Their big challenge this year is what's called the Origin Project. Department of Justice is getting a new computer system for child support enforcement, and all the counties are required to go to do the beta testing and the training and all. And we just found out yesterday that the start date, which was supposed to be July, has been punted to September for the pilot counties. So the whole project is already back 2 months. But it's not because of a problem with the software. It's because they're discovering all of these more things, documents and all that need to be prepared. The medical examiner goes out for to help the forensic pathologist determine cause and manner of death. We are, thank you very much, up to 3 full-time investigators. That really has made a big difference in the quality of work that's being done and in cutting back on our extra help. That's so that we can manage 24/7 coverage. We have some EMTs and nurses who help fulfill the balance of the calendar. And victim services. Victim services is mostly grant funded, and you've heard this before. Victims in Oregon have constitutional rights, and it's our obligation to make sure those rights are protected for the victims of crime in our county. Here are our highlights. That's just the beginning of our highlights. We have had a big year, weeding out 1,200 cases for the medical examiner to investigate. Family law is $21 million. Victim services assisted 3,300 victims of crime. We had over 7,300 referrals from law enforcement for criminal prosecution. 22,000 restraining orders. Here are our treatment court graduations. We just had a graduation of 9 on Friday. It was very, very impressive. 36 drug court graduates last year, 11 veterans court, and 1 from mental health court. Mental health court has been a terrific challenge. I still have faith that it's going to work, but because so many of our mentally ill are unhoused, it's hard to get them into court. So 1 graduation is actually a huge milestone. Sexual assault on campus prosecutor. We have a backup person training on that as well, so that that lawyer's on call 24 hours a day. Our other programs, the 416 program, and 5,600 hours of volunteer hours from victim service. We have 22 currently volunteers. We can take a maximum of 25. I already talked. Yes.
I just wanted, can you go back to the last slide on when you talk about mental health court?
Yes.
So that was my understanding that mental health court was more of a challenge, but not for the reason that you stated. I'm just wondering if you could elaborate a little bit on that. There's a proposal to make an investment in permanent supportive housing by the county. There's a community-wide conversation about this, and so that's your belief that housing is the primary impediment to successful completion of mental health court? And if that's the case, do you have a thought about what a good solution would be to create a higher level of success rate?
So there are several challenges to mental health court. The first is that the person has to be fit to proceed, meaning they can understand the nature of the proceedings against them and assist. So once we have determined that a person is capable of coming into the court proceeding, then we have to find a way to keep them coming back to court. This program started with no funding at all. It was just everybody pitching in and using resources they have. We have since received some grant support for mentors, and behavioral health is way overtaxed. court. I mean, Whitney is covering all the mental health courts in the county, the 2 municipal courts. But the primary barrier to success in mental health court is being able to have contact with your client. And if your client is unhoused, then you have to go out and find them. And if they're unhoused, getting them to come back to court at the time that they're scheduled is very difficult. So that is truly the primary barrier once we are able to get somebody fit to proceed.
Are these people on probation?
No. No, mental health court, it can be as a condition of probation, but it also could be under the same model as our treatment court, a conditional discharge.
And then Commissioner Ford.
I'm only going to say 2 things today, and this is one of them. And it's a follow-up, and I wasn't going to say it at this point, but since Steve kind of breached the issue of the unhoused and how difficult it is to provide services, simple services like, for instance, in court, it becomes impossible. And how much does that tax the rest of the system when you're having to use your resources to try to get them in court, and they're not showing up anyway? The other is the reduction of property crimes through high risk of offender supervision, which I would guess a lot of that comes back to unhoused, unaddressed.
So we have the benefit of using sponsors housing for our 416 program.
For the 416 program, okay.
Yes, and so everyone who goes into the program initially spends 60 days as a guest of the sheriff. And that has turned out to be we don't know the science behind it, but that truly is the magic number for success. Anybody who has gone into treatment, gotten out of jail and gone directly to treatment with less than 60 days in custody has failed.
Yeah.
And so
I visited that guest house the other day. But once again, as we talk about housing people who are the greatest risk to the system, I'm going to put a plug in for the MLK facility, which is the beginning of our addressing behavioral health housing in the county. It's not the beginning of it, but it's the next step in addressing it. It's not funded yet fully, but we're working through it, and there's nothing much that's going to come up in this budget process until we start talking about housing very specifically. But the DA's affected by unhoused, the sheriff's affected by unhoused, the emergency rooms are affected by unhoused. We are all affected by unhoused folks, particularly ones who are suffering from either behavioral health issues or substance issues. And that's the one thing I wanted to say, and I was going to say it at some point, and this was the time that I was going to say it.
well, thank you for that. Any other questions about the magic that's going on? All right. Well, I've already talked about the DUI investigator. I'm very excited about what that's going to mean for our outcomes. And I already mentioned grand jury recordation being an unfunded mandate and a challenge for us. Here is the Lane County Strategic Plan and how we fit into it. Mostly it's under your Safe and Healthy County, but as I was tasked with finding other areas where we actually contribute to the strategic plan, we have areas, we're touching all areas of the strategic plan.
Real quick, Commissioner.
So question, so going back to the slide before and on the upcoming unfunded mandate for grand jury recordation. So when you say unfunded mandate, is that an opinion or is that actual unfunded mandate from a technical point of view?
Well,
and the reason why I bring this up is because, as we know, Lynn County actually challenged the unfunded mandate portion and won in court. And so that's why I bring this piece up, is if it's actually an unfunded mandate, do you know if the DAs are looking to potentially challenge that, not challenge it? What's the thought there?
right now they're in a holding pattern because there was money put aside for this, and the 3 counties that are in pilot right now have not received dime one yet.
Okay.
So that's why I'm calling
So
it an
you're-
unfunded
okay,
mandate,
so
is
that's good, okay.
so far, they are required
Yeah.
to pay and then hope that they can recoup those costs later. They did receive the equipment as promised,
Yeah.
had to install it themselves, work with their own IT departments or TS here to make it work, and they have had to cover all of the costs to date.
So just, I would just ask the Budget Committee Commissioners just keep us posted on the outcome, because it would be kind of interesting to see where that all goes. But I appreciate your answer on that.
Back to the strategic plan. And as promised, blasted through the slides. What would you like to talk about?
Yes, Larry.
I have a couple more picky budget questions.
Okay, well, I'll get my picky budget out, and I'll get my picky budget person up here.
So, INET drug court revenue has gone down substantially, like 50%.
So the INET was the Interagency Narcotics Enforcement Team, and they originally, we had a HIDA grant, a high intensity drug trafficking area. We had a federal grant that covered the cost of the prosecutor, but that was a step-down grant. And so INET was picking up the step-down and eventually was funding $120,000 of a lawyer in my office. That lawyer had to be dedicated just to doing INET cases. INET folded, number one. I mean, it's a great partnership, and they have the capacity to do great work, but Sheriff's Office couldn't participate due to lack of staffing. Eugene Police couldn't participate fully due to lack of staffing. And so at one point they were asking the lawyer from my office to help tail people. Well, that wasn't going to happen. And so just due to the inability to keep the program going, it folded, and we no longer get that $120,000.
Last picky. I noticed your telephone expense has gone way up. It was $33,000 last year. It's $57,000 this year.
Is that the Verizon? Is that the
What's
Verizon
the-
bill, or is that the telephone?
Can you tell me the
cost for
expense line
county?
item that you're looking at?
It's on page 149. It just says telephone services.
So
That's the LCOG phone, or the transition from an LCOG-based phone system to one that the county is doing internally. And I believe Christine can speak more on that.
Add a little bit that last year it was budgeted all within general expense for the general fund departments, and this year we've moved it out into the departments. So that's why you're going to see it in any department that has general fund is going to see a big increase. And because it's more ongoing than we originally thought, so that's why we moved it back out there.
We have a project to replace the existing phone system because it's aging and outdated, and so we're going out for an RFP now. And, so in the last year or 2 years, we've charged each department, what is it, $15
$15
per
a
line?
month per line.
Per month per line, and that revenue is being collected in order to pay for the upgrade, the telephone system upgrade.
Yes, Commissioner Short.
I just wanted to ask a question about telephones too. It seems like we are replacing an antiquated phone system with a phone system that will become antiquated quickly. Is there any way to jump that current concern about replacing the antiquated system? And what I mean by that is just issue people's cell phones, government cell phones.
almost everybody in my office, except the clerical staff, has government-issued cell phones.
Yeah.
We would still need a front desk, and we still would have, I mean, I guess we could issue clerical staff cell phones as well, but
Well, I can certainly see in a high-traffic job, like being the person that handles the phones at the DA's office, that would be an example where you need a pretty stationary phone. and you need somebody that was pretty much on that phone. And in the olden days, there were 2 people doing that job. There was somebody called. I don't know how many are doing it now.
Well, we have one full-time and then one part-time.
Yeah, so I get that, but that's not the vast majority of phones. That's one phone. And if people could just be told who to talk to, that would really, I think, it'd be a lot faster for people to deal with.
Miss Mary?
Rather than having lots of, I don't know, there's just a lot of phones that aren't being answered because people are using their cell phones.
I was just going to add that that's probably a technology services question. They came and talked to you about the project. They're the ones in charge of it, so we can get some information for you on the technology behind it.
But I know
because
that
there is information.
I know
about
in the legal services industry, they're selling cell phone packages now where if you're not available, it goes to a central office number. If you're in a high customer service type job where your phone starts ringing at 8 o'clock in the morning, continues all the way till 5, and then you turn it off, it's getting switched over to somebody else's phone. It's supposed to take it after you're done. And it just seems like there's a lot of... We're using 2 systems now, cell phones and landlines. And my view is that eventually we'll get more sophisticated cell phones and we won't be using landlines.
You're talking to a person whose office is occupied by gnomes who attack my technology all the time.
Very good.
So I don't know the answer to that. I am shocked and stunned when my voicemail shows up in my email.
Yeah. Well, I would say you or I aren't the best people to be asking or answering these questions, and I appreciate Ms. Wood trying to help us with who might be the right people.
I'm the person who's got a permanent call into TDS for help for my gnomes.
Just maybe to help answer that question, the new system's going to be voice over the internet protocol known as VoIP. So it's really not landlines.
Oh, there you go.
So it's, yeah. Your computer is going to be your phone, more or less.
Oh no. I'll never get another call again.
More gnomes.
You will have a phone-looking device on your desk.
You'll have a phone-looking device on your desk, but it will not go through the traditional landline. That's what we're getting away from with the new system, is being tied down to landline systems.
That's good. Yeah.
One quick question for you. So I think last year when we talked about adding another assistant district attorney, it turned out to be relatively revenue neutral, right? Because through the JRI, they recouped the cost more or less. What's the case with the DUI investigator?
The DUI investigator is going to be completely grant funded for, well, year 1, and then it's a step down 2 and 3. We can front load and get full coverage for 2 years. I have the support, I hope, I have the support of the county administrator, finance director, I hope of the board, to continue that. I mean, in 3 years we'll know whether we're getting a significant, that our metrics are good, so that the grant will continue. We also are looking for other funding sources. Denise Walters from LCOG has been terrific in trying to find ways to leverage this money into getting additional money, not only for the DUI investigator, but we're trying to get a DUI court started up. And so stay tuned. We'll see where that goes.
Any other questions for DA Cornell? Yes, no?
All right.
Thank you very much. Okay. Moving right along. Looks like the sheriff's up. There you go. Brought back up. If that's all right.
Everybody's here and armed.
They're always on. It's just visible
I
today.
know, but it's just so comforting. safe. Oh, very safe.
Yeah, I think you can send them all.
Radios, uniforms, anything I could think of. Laptop, and then in year 3, Chris said he started
Yeah, right. Yeah, and let the door close.
Yes, please. Sheriff Trapp, thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Is it Vice Chair?
It is Vice Chair.
And Budget Committee members, thank you. We'll do introductions real quick.
Thank you.
So, obviously, I'm the sheriff, and it sounds really cool, and people expect that I know a lot. And I know a lot because of these really competent men and women that I bring along. And so, when we get to the Q&A or any point during the presentation, if you have a question that is too detailed, I'm going to turn to one of these. So I'll just start at the end. Billy Halverson is a lieutenant assigned to corrections. Clint Riley is a lieutenant assigned to corrections. Steve French, lieutenant assigned to corrections. Chris Doyle is our police captain. Carl Wilkerson is our police lieutenant. Dan Buchwald is our outgoing corrections captain. Has how many days left?
38.
38 days left.
You knew that right away.
Currently in extra health capacity, and so we're very appreciative. Danny's had a wonderful career, and we're using every last drop of it as he heads for the door. Deb Haller is our finance manager in the sheriff's office, and Cliff Harold is our chief deputy. So I think watching the district attorney's presentation, it works well for me too. If you have a question midstream, just say something, stop me, and we'll plug in. Right.
Yes.
Okay. We are essentially 3 divisions. We have the Office of Sheriff, and then 3 service divisions. Administration, police services, and our adult corrections, or generally corrections. You see all the numbers there. We have a collective total of 202 sworn members of our office today, with 286.75 FTE total. Our most significant current year budget change to note was the shift of 50 beds that were previously funded federally through a U.S. Marshals contract. We have now shifted those in the absence of that contract under levy revenues to continue those beds in operation in the jail, which moved us in February to an additional bed count of 367. For current local offender population. And if you have interest in these, stop me. Otherwise, you do.
Go ahead.
So, you said it's replaced by levy. Is that the jail levy?
Yeah, the public safety jail youth services levy that was passed initially in 2013 and then renewed last spring is funding jail operations and youth service operations, and so there's still additional room in the current budget to grow jail operations, and so we were able to take the existing jail beds funded by the U.S. Marshals, $2 million-ish, a round figure of $2 million annually, and shift that revenue. When the federal revenue ceased, we drew from the revenue created by the jail levy.
So we won't have additional money or nearly as much to get back this year, right?
Correct, and we will get to that, I think, at 4:30. Yes, and we'll cover that in much more detail.
The U.S. Marshal grant was $1,289,000, and the federal revenue went down to $1,903,000. So is there something else?
Well, the federal bed contract was on an as-used, and so it was budgeted for the maximum, but then they didn't always use the maximum, so the amount of drop is accurate-ish.
Yeah, and we didn't receive the SCAP
Grant.
Okay, so there's other federal revenues, not just the U.S. Marshals revenue in the jail budget.
So, Sheriff, real quick, where did the people go who were in the Marshals feds? Are they housed someplace else?
That's the answer. The best answer I can give you is someplace else.
Okay.
They are no longer in the Lane County Jail. They were all criminal defendant, federal court criminal defendants, and here to answer in court to the Eugene Federal Court. They came from counties, 9 counties around us, as far as Deschutes and Coos, Lincoln, Benton, Lynn, Roseburg, Douglas County. So we brought in a lot of federal defendants to our jail and held them pretrial while they answered to the courts. The federal marshals system there is a federal correctional facility in Oregon. It's in Sheridan. So I think some of them were probably rehoused back at the federal facility. I don't know if they've secured other contracts with other jails. I know that as we were terminating our agreement, they began conversations with other sheriffs and other correction facilities around the region. And so it's likely kind of spread around, plus more use of their federal facility in Sheridan.
Okay, thank you.
Let's see. This various resources we have, both in police services contracts and dispatch contracts, the levy and general fund grants. I think these are template slides that we filled, so I guess I don't have anything specific to present. We were asked to put this in the slide, so if you have a question, let me know. Partnerships, many. We have an ongoing partnership with the Oregon State Police, where they investigate traffic fatalities in all of Lane County, even on Lane County roadways, and the exchange for that is the our office then responds to what has typically been referred to as OSP's jurisdiction of state-owned properties, parks, and otherwise. And that has allowed us to see some savings in continuing to have training for our crash reconstructionist team. They're very in-depth and expensive training program. State Police has a substantial investment in that trained resource throughout the state that they are able to draw from. And then we have contracts with Oak Ridge Police and Fire and Lane Community College and Lane County Probation for dispatch services. In addition to that, we have property and evidence contract with Probation. We have an ongoing relationship with Lane County Behavioral Health and jail services, mental health focused jail services. The jail also has an ongoing partnership with Lane Workforce for workforce readiness programming with inmates, so that when they're released from jail, they're more ready for employment and helping with resumes and other skill building. Our ongoing contract law enforcement, police services for cities of Bonita and Cresswell, Dunes Patrol through the State Parks Department, marine enforcement through the State Marine Board, and forest patrols on BLM lands from BLM.
A quick question about those with the city of Cresswell and Bonita and so forth. Are those all seem to be really kind of stable, long-term type of relationships, correct?
Cresswell and Bonita, you said? Yes. Yes, they have. I don't know if any of us know the starting date of those contracts, but I think they date to the 70s for Cresswell. And Bonita is not far behind. So they have been uninterrupted, long-standing relationships where, and the cities, Cresswell more so than Bonita historically, about every 3 to 5 years we'll do an in-depth analysis of the cost effectiveness of contract law enforcement versus other sourcing for law enforcement, whether it's their own police department or otherwise. And it continues to be the result that the last study Crestwell had done was 3 or 4 years ago now, maybe a little more, from PSU, a very in-depth study that was very clear in the result that contract law enforcement is the most economical, effective way for a city, certainly a smaller city, to provide its law enforcement service.
And you get the feeling from the city of Veneta and Crestwell that they feel that way as well.
They do, right. Yeah, they once they look at the analysis, they are in agreement that that's our most economical way of presenting the service. We have ongoing conversations about what that service will look like and how we deliver it, and that's the job of the contract supervisor that's assigned there to be the liaison to the city management and city council and mayor to make sure that we're providing a service in the way that they want to receive it, but yet still is compliant with our policies and our values as a sheriff's office. Ultimately, they're still our deputies.
Very good. Commissioner Short?
Follow up on this topic of law enforcement to the smaller communities. Do you see any opportunities there with other cities to provide the high quality, more comprehensive law enforcement services that I feel we offer to Crestwell and Veneta, as opposed to the lower quality? And I know that there are commissioners that represent those communities, so I don't want to name any, but I would describe the lower quality police services being provided in those communities. And I guess part of the reason they don't want to make the transition is, well, they're administering their own police departments and they're proud of them and they like it and it's local and it's administered local. But in my view, it's also a breeding ground for mistakes, for unfortunate, if not very, very unfortunate incidents because of lack of training of officers, lack of the dedication that we have in our police services division for proper police services. And I know your job isn't to criticize other people, but what about the positive part of, hey, we can offer this to you. Here's the Portland State study on Crestwell. We're already doing this. We're saving them money, and meanwhile, we're providing a better level of police services.
Yeah, so the answer is quite simple. Yes, the service is there for any entity that has an interest in contracting. We just have recently been in conversations with the city of Dune Cities. There's 2 categories of small towns in Lane County. Some have their police departments and some don't, even though they're incorporated. And an incorporated city, Dune City, Lowell, Westboro, if they don't have their own law enforcement, the sheriff's office is the default law enforcement anyway. We are statutorily obligated to provide a policing service to the community. The barrier for those cities is the cost of contracting. It's not an inexpensive service to deliver. You all know that very well. We are a significant user of county resources. But to your specific question, those cities that have their own police departments have had conversations with the sheriff's office and other jurisdictions for providing, at least in one case, Junction City used to contract with the sheriff's office for a very short time. But there is as I have learned to understand it through these conversations over the years, there is a unique interest and desire of a municipality to have its own identity, its autonomy, its own control. When we contract with Crestwell, they don't dictate our policies and how ultimately we police. We will coordinate and work with them as much as possible, provide a service that they're satisfied with. But push come to shove, it's our policy in my office, and we will police in the manner that is most appropriate for the sheriff's office. And that may change sheriff to sheriff. And so there is some self-control and self-governance interest there that the cities, I think Coburg recently voted, and their city residents voted to retain their own city police, as small as it is. That was the city's the community's preference, not just the city leadership. So, and I tell, whenever we have the conversation about contract law enforcement, I tell every entity, I'm not here to sell a service to you. If you want a contract, we can provide the service. We'll enter an agreement. We'll do that. And so I'm not here to try to convince them to buy from the sheriff's office, but at the same time, as representatives of the city councils and their mayors need to, I feel it's their obligation to provide the best service to their citizens at the most cost-effective way to go about it. And however they decide that is up to them.
Okay. Well, thank you. That's a great summary of it. And I just want to say that in other arenas within the county government, Mr. Coles has been very active with other small counties with their assessment and taxation needs, even some quite far away in Eastern Oregon, and he's providing a superior service at a lower cost, so the counties are willing to accept a contractual relationship. And I think that it's great that we're not trying to force it on cities, but I also don't think that the true costs are being paid by these smaller cities. And if they're trying to operate a tiny police force without the training and experience and the kinds of equipment that you have and how much more professional the operation is, I just see it as they're not measuring the cost of a death, they're not measuring the cost of a civil rights lawsuit, they're not measuring a lot of things that we measure, that we have to measure given our size. So I guess I'll put in my pitch for, let's try to expand it and let's try to tell the folks that there's a true cost involved. And dollars right now you're paying less, but you're getting a lot less and you're taking on a lot of risk for your taxpayers.
Right. Yeah, and I think this may kind of help mitigate some of that concern from the cities. We have, speaking of partnerships on the slides, I don't know that we have this specifics bullet point, but we have great partnerships with all of the cities of Lane County, and those with police departments and those without. And those with small police departments with limited resources, we are very responsive to, and when they have a need, and our staff and their staff work well together. And when they have a need, we're able to support generally them through those times. And so I think in some ways, you could argue it could be mitigated to some of the concern you've expressed, but ultimately not my decision. It's up to the city leadership in each of those cases. All right, one here. Treatment courts. Dee Perlow spoke a little bit about treatment courts and the 416 program, and so we have grant management for those courts for some of their revenue processes. We also have dedicated jail beds to those treatment courts to ensure successful participation. Also with the 416 property crime program, we have dedicated beds. In fact, Captain Buckle, remind me if I'm wrong, but like you said, in January we increased our bed dedication to 416 from 6 to 10. So we're currently providing 10 beds exclusively for the 416 program, as well as the treatment court, in addition to. We are the financial fiduciary agency for the shared regional radio system, LRIG, and the Southwest 7-County Radio Consortium. And we have an ongoing community event with a partnership with Rotary and Cabela's with the annual Life Jacket Exchange, and I think we provide approximately 300 life jackets to children. Essentially 300 children in our community get a new life jacket each year through that program. New or reused, high quality, good condition, so that ensure their safety on the waterways. We also are continuing the every 15 minutes drinking and driving education program. Most recently in March, we finished a program in Creswell High School. From divisions, we'll start with the administrative division. Services provided there are all of these bullet items. I won't read them all, but admin is typically where you see the services like dispatch, police records, concealed handgun licensing, jail records. and then the typical administrative type of functions. The highlights for the administrative division this year are continued significant number of concealed handgun license processes. As of April 3rd, Lane County currently has in issuance 21,144 active concealed handgun licenses to our community members. We are active participant in the DEA drug take-back program. We do a couple of those drug take-back events around the community, different places each year, and receive quite a positive response and take quite a few. I was at Rotary here recently, and a member handed me a bottle of prescription drugs I brought back to the courthouse after lunch and threw in our containers. We have a container that anybody can deposit drugs in any day during business hours at the front desk. Civil, you saw on D.A. Perlow's slide about, she said 2,000 restraining orders or protective orders through her office, and that's a significant part of our civil paperwork that we receive. And we're also a sex offender registration point. Services of the police division are obviously our patrol section, search and rescue, very visible component. The civil service, you saw the civil numbers on the administrative division. We have an administrative component of civil enforcement, and where they receive the papers and document all of that, and then we have the enforcement side with deputies, 2 deputies that go out in the community and serve those dedicated, 2 dedicated deputies, and the rest of the papers are served by our general patrol services. Detectives and court security, prison transport, and then all of our contract law enforcement.
Sure.
Yes.
Before you move on past that, you typically in your patrol division, I heard you say it before, any time during the day you have, keep a minimum of 3 deputies out on patrol. I mean, occasionally there's going to be the resident deputies out, etc. What would it mean for patrol services to be able to add that to 4 deputies? You got another 5.8 FTE or whatever it takes to add one more 24/7. What's that do for patrol services, that extra 33% manpower?
I wouldn't have an immediate answer as far as a specific threshold that we could move from this bar to this bar as far as additional numbers of calls handled or the nature of call handled. But I will tell you, we'll just go to this next slide, this center top slide, if you do the math on that, our deputies receive a dispatch to 43,419 calls for service in 2017. That is an average of 119 calls per day, which further breaks down to 5 calls per hour, today being covered by 3 deputies. So 3 deputies each hour handle 5 calls. Most of those calls in their nature today are in progress or active, where we are being reported a threat to person safety or a threat to property. And so they're not just a car breaking call. They're usually fairly complex. They're often result in a trip to jail. And so that one call, while it might take 15 to 30 minutes to get there, and maybe another 20, 30 minutes to an hour to resolve, might also involve another couple of hours or more with report writing and jail custodial processing. And so if you really understand the depth of what an individual call for service for a deputy sheriff entails, 5 calls per hour for 3 deputies, I really don't know how they do it. And so does that mean this would give them the needed relief that they're so deserving of today, and we don't change the threshold and let them breathe for a little bit? Or do we kind of keep the pressure on for customer service and try to feed them a little more of the call demand? And do we up the threshold of what we dispatch to, and do we take that 43,419 and make that 56,000 calls next year? And is it 7 calls per hour for 4 deputies? So those are the things I think what we've experienced in the years past is as we've made adjustments, both upward and downward in call for service response, we have played with it. We played with both the public tolerance and we've played with deputy tolerance. And one of the tolerances we realized was unacceptable for the community was the citizen self-report form for a home residential burglary, unoccupied, nobody home at the time. That somebody comes home from work, finds their house has been broken into. We, for a while, were sending them the citizen self-report form. We learned very quickly that was unacceptable. And so we made an adjustment. And it takes us a while to find that equilibrium of where we can maximize the deputy service delivery and where the public is tolerant of lack of service. And so that's a very long way to say I don't have an immediate answer for you, Commissioner. And I think it would take some time in just simple experience, and it would be the police captain and lieutenant's duty to observe and manage that and work through their supervisor teams to get the feedback and allow us to address policy on call for service. It's really a fairly complex. The math is quick and simple, but where is it tolerated and when are we going to burn out our deputies and they want to work somewhere else type of pressure against the community needs. Those 43,000 calls are essentially 71% of our calls for service, so 29% of our calls for service we choose not to send a deputy to. We do the citizen self-report form or other methods of resolution. CIT is Crisis Intervention Team training, and this is what's typically referred to as the Memphis model, is the training that's been provided through Lane County Law Enforcement through granting. And many of our law enforcement organizations throughout the county have participated. We certainly have, and the Sheriff's Office Patrol Group today has 80% of our team has completed the 40-hour crisis intervention training, focusing on community members with mental illness. 80% is because we were higher than that, but we have seven new deputies in training in the police division, which is 20% of our patrol group. And so once they complete their training will include CIT. In their final phases of training, they will have that as part of their overall training resume, and our goal is to maintain a 100% training of all of our deputies responding to the community with mental health training. To the Corrections Division, this is essentially the jail, but it encompasses much more than just the jail. We have the Community Corrections Center, which is also the Residential Reentry Center, commonly referred to as the Community Release Center, Work Release Center. We have the electronic surveillance program out of that, Offender Management Center, our work crew, community service, mental health services, education, and sit-in. We have highlights for this year. I don't know if it's a highlight, but we have over 13,000 arrestees who were booked into the Lane County Jail in 2017. Many of these defendants and offenders are placed into our alternative programs, which we have covered, majority of them, to maximize our jail space. As many people as we can put in alternative programs outside of the hard jail, the more jail capacity we have for those who really need to be in confinement. We see the total number of capacity-based releases in 2017 was almost 2,400, but that's less than half of pre-levy numbers. That 13,000 bookings was about 37 people per day booked into the Lane County Jail.
Real quick, Sheriff. Larry?
Sheriff, so I was at the parole probation.
Yes, right.
And you mentioned the Community Corrections Center. How many people are there now?
Yes, 38 is our capacity. The Sheriff's Office current capacity at the Community Release Center, Community Corrections Center, which is the first floor. We didn't tour the first floor. So parole and probation occupies the full second floor. That used to be housing on the second floor, and then operations and a little bit of housing on the first floor.
So it's decreased because of parole and probation?
Well, from 2007 through 12, we laid off 95 deputies, and a big portion of that was service and corrections and patrol reductions, to include the community release center. We almost had it closed, and so when parole and probation was given the boot from the old annex, when it was being torn down, the upstairs was relatively vacant, and we didn't have immediate hope that we would have new revenues to add inmates back to that program. So at the time it made sense. We kind of all, I think, hoped it was a temporary circumstance for parole and probation. So it was remodeled, provided a space for them, not best, but functional. At the time, they've clearly outgrown it. The sheriff's office has clearly outgrown its capacity in the limited community release center. So those are the conversations behind that interest in changing parole and probation's location, and then allowing the sheriff's office to regain that access to increase the housing. Overall, sheriff's office highlights and outcomes of the year. One thing I really want to point out here, if you had HR already present the laws, okay, I think I did see that. We, before the major cutbacks before the major cutbacks started in 2007, the sheriff's office employed its own at 1.2 FTE HR staff. We have fairly unique and rather complex recruitment processes. Takes quite a bit of time and effort to manage, and they're not generally consistent or interchangeable with other county department hiring practices. So we really do need a dedicated resource. We couldn't afford to maintain. It was one of the services that we chose, internal service we chose to eliminate in the lean times was our HR. We have since relied on county HR, and for most of that time we have HR analyst Pam Darnell, who is a tremendous resource. We have, if you look at that green slide, we have 24 in the 2017 calendar year. She individually oversaw 24 recruitments, which garnered 1,349 applicants, which resulted ultimately in 53 new employees to the sheriff's office in all of our assignments. Many of those deputy sheriffs, some of those dispatchers, records officers, other staff. A huge workload, and so I can't sing strongly enough the praises of Pam and our HR support team that we have. It's worked out very well, and one of the things that we have realized in this recruitment process is we are hiring about, and with last year's numbers, 3.9% of our applicant pool. So it seems like we spin our wheels a lot. It feels like Pam spins her wheels a lot trying to recruit, and we ultimately don't hire many of the applicants. Search and rescue, I wanted to point out there, that says 12,000 training hours, which is amazing on its own. Those are for volunteers, but really our volunteers provided over 24,000 hours. And if you divide that by an FTE, that provides 12 FTE to the Sheriff's Office Search and Rescue Program at volunteer cost, which is free generally. Future challenges, we put a couple of them up here. We have quite a few still. Ongoing training issues that we continue to see increased demands by the state to maintain our certifications. They're increasing our demands on maintenance training. This year, they're moving to a mandate for our corrections certifications to a specified number of hours. We have that for telecommunicators and for police deputies. And much of that requires active training environments as opposed to online learning, and so there's constant conflicts with shift management and overtime for training. Emergency management program has been and continues to be very insufficiently staffed for our county size, and demands on it comparatively. We range in our partner or comparator agencies, counties that man staff a emergency management program from 6 FTE in Clackamas and Washington counties to 2 in Jackson and Deschutes. And we remain at a single FTE with limited support for Linda Cook, who you all know. And she is similarly overwhelmed and many times on her own, that we're challenged in looking at future opportunities of how we can better accommodate that. As we increase our jail, we increase our inmate population, there are more demands for presence at the courtrooms because those people are in jail and where they now need a courtesy shuttle by our deputies. And so as those numbers rise, they're put demands on our court transport staff. And so we're starting to recognize that internally, we talk about the community criminal justice system in Lane County, where we have this 3 or 4-legged stool that we need to kind of raise everybody equally. We have that internally in the sheriff's office. We put too much pressure on one area because we've increased services in the jail. Another area now is starting to feel the pressure. So we're working through how to most effectively adjust our staffing internally. Police services, one thing we're finding out is that the proliferation of electronic devices in everything we do. There is not a violent crime case that our detective team receives that doesn't have a substantial amount of involvement to electronic devices. And so if we're trying to identify involved people, it's cell phone downloading and computer forensics. I had a slide somewhere that spoke to our detective team too, and I think I glossed over it. Sorry, Carl. Future challenges. I think it's been mentioned a couple times, I've heard already, that we're seeing record numbers of traffic fatalities in Lane County. And I'm a firm believer that we have a 3-legged stool in traffic safety. The 3 E's of traffic safety are engineering, education, and enforcement. We have, for all intents and purposes, completely removed enforcement from traffic safety. We can engineer our roadways to be as safe as possible. We can educate our community on how to best navigate those roadways to remain safe. But if we don't enforce the rules, people will not follow the rules. And so we're seeing very dangerous driving behaviors that go unchecked. And in the 5 last years of the traffic team in its active capacity, the deputies, all sheriff's office deputies, wrote on average 25,000 citations a year. Last year, in 2016 and in 2017, we are just right around 3,000. That's an 88% reduction in traffic safety enforcement in rural Lane County. The state police numbers are down from where they have historically been, and so we're seeing a very unpoliced county. It is not uncommon at all for us to hear a DUI call reported, drunk driver reported, and our deputies and troopers to be so far out of position. Those people are safely home and passed out in bed before we can even get regionally close within the county to that driver. So I don't see an immediate fix to this on the enforcement side, but we are actively engaged with the fatal team analysis that's headed up by Public Works, and we'll continue whatever efforts we can provide. But this is a tremendous challenge and a significant public safety impact as we move forward. We are continue to struggle with our county size, our limited number of deputies. I think I heard conversation. Chair Hitchman has joined us. I think I heard conversation last week that there used to be 26 deputies on duty on a shift, and we have 25 deputies assigned to our patrol group. And so with only 3 deputies per shift, when 26 deputies were out there, you could have them all in the far corners of the county, and they could be relatively close in geographic location to calls for service. And here we have 3 deputies. If you have one in Florence and one in Cottage Grove, their time response is significant. And this is not uncommon that we respond deputies from the valley to the coast, or from the coast to the valley, or from the coast to the Cascades. And it's an ongoing challenge. I was asked a question about response times. The challenge that we have in moving to new technology is we don't have a report available from the vendor to provide that kind of data as yet, but we are working on it. So I'm hoping we can start having some documented call response time data to help try to measure some of this. Impacts by the community on lack of patrol services. We're still unable to respond to many calls for service. We send the very irritating citizen self-report form. Quality of life crimes are uninvestigated. I get referrals from the board members often about a dissatisfied customer of Wayne County Public Safety Services, and we are ultimately, in most of those cases, unable to respond further to their inquiry. In many of them, we have responded already, or at least we have told them our ability to respond, and then they call a commissioner for additional service. And so after we hear from them, you hear from them, and we are just unable to respond back to them satisfactorily, and that will continue until we can substantially increase our policing service. Target-rich environment, we heard that for quite a bit of time. We're not the best and brightest star for recruitment when people are looking around at a resourced agency comparison. And we're starting to see some impacts of not having a dedicated drug enforcement team in the absence of INET. We do have verified information from Portland metro area where gang members have discussed moving operations to Eugene due to the lack of an active drug enforcement team and general law enforcement. So, not unlike some of the criminal community conversations we heard when we had no jail capacity. The conversation were, go to Lane County, you won't stay in jail. Now they're saying, go to Lane County, deal your drugs, because there's no drug team and there's not much enforcement. So, those are uncomforting things to hear, and I think will present bigger challenges down the road. I believe this is the last slide, and not much change in here. I think we touch significantly to each of the county's pillars of the strategic plan, and be certainly open to more in-depth questions if you have them.
Anything you want to think of?
Question about the recruitment. Some time ago, I was having lunch down in the cafeteria, and there was a sign for the Boise City Police Department recruiting people rather aggressively.
Did you take it down?
Sort of different than our approach with the cities in Lane County. They sent people over here and said, you have a better deal if you go to Boise. Is that kind of thing still happening, or is it that aggressive that other police agencies would like come into our own hood, looking for our best people and snagging someone?
I think Boise might have felt comfortable. I didn't see that, but they might have felt comfortable because they are somewhat far from home here. I think we see a higher level of respect for that bold interaction amongst regional law enforcement, certainly. There is still an exceptionally competitive market for recruiting in law enforcement. I think the Police Academy continues to publish numbers that in the next year and maybe 2 years, annually 500 law enforcement officer replacements due to retirement and attrition. So I think they're still targeting 2,000 over the next 2 years, and we compete with every other police agency and every other correction agency, and we do our share of recruiting from existing law enforcement employment with some success, and we lose our law enforcement personnel to other agencies. Maybe not at the same rate. I think we're a little better at retention.
You know, I find that when I see a police car and I'm driving, almost inevitably my speed drops as that vehicle becomes clearer, either in my rearview mirror or ahead. I don't think I'm any different than other people. What about self-driving cars that are painted to look like what I think of it being a
Black and white.
Yeah, is that a?
Well, if
is
they
that-
quit running over people in cities far and wide, maybe we can.
Well, I just read, Dennis may know something about this too, but I get the AARP magazine, and they just had a big article about how in Las Vegas they have a self-driving van. I don't see enough gray hair over there to see any nodding. But, you know what I'm saying, is that it's coming, and yes, there are people that see the safety problems, and I'm one of them, but, you know, it's a big savings to have a vehicle driven around without paying the person to do the driving.
We've actually played with retired police car decoys, where we take an old patrol car and leave the lights on it, leave the stickers on the doors, remove the radios and the weapons, and park it intermittently around the community. City of Eugene has done that. I don't think they do anymore either. That's in itself is challenging to try to manage that. When people realize that it's been in the same place for very long and it's unoccupied, then you start having. We have the speed trailer that we park, and it's. I didn't know glass was magnetic, but it is a beer bottle magnet. and so those are challenges when you try to do that kind of unmanned community engagement. You are susceptible to that kind of feedback. I will say, however, that we are always open to entertain technology at any level that is affordable to our resources, and we would, as that technology improves, and I'm sure it will be much more accommodating to local communities down the road. I don't know when. I think it's way premature at this point.
For the record, I don't meet the age requirement for art.
Oh, good. That's good to know.
Larry, did you have your hand up? Okay, then, Jay.
A few more budget questions.
Sure.
Page 265, professional and consulting went down over $1 million from last year. It was $7 million to went down to $5 million.
Part of that is moving some of the expenses associated with the 50 beds for the U.S. Marshals. So when the beds moved, the expenses for medical food also had to move into the budget.
Yeah, that's the last year. I think the big service driver for that consulting and professional services is jail food and medical. Two giant contracts.
Miscellaneous payments went way down from $1 million to $400,000.
I'm sorry, what?
Miscellaneous payments from $1 million to $400,000
On page 66.
That one I'd have to get back to you on because there's a wide variety of things that get paid out of that.
Yeah, it could have been put into other accounts too, yes.
It could be across divisions, different programs, so I have to.
And then the last one, M&S adjustment, what is that?
That was an account that my predecessor liked when he was trying to balance a special revenue program. So we were eliminating the use of that account as it was not an appropriate account to use.
That's it.
Commissioner?
So, back to my question about adding the one patrol officer 24/7, and as we, looking back at your third to last and second to last slide about police services, if we had that extra officer out there, the chances of having to actually make that 103-mile, there'd at least be a little bit more random chance that the calls would be closer to the officer, provided they're not grouped together because they just had to back each other up or something like that. Is it possible for you to get a little bit more information about that as I consider possibilities for budget amendment proposals as we get closer to the final portions of our budget here? Because I think I agree with you, that's a real area we're in crisis is in our patrol division. And have been for years. We managed to get back to 24-hour patrol, but now it's kind of like, how do we get this a little bit more of a level of service? So understanding, is that a major change in your level of service and understanding also the financial cost to make that next step of increment. Is it worth it, or is even a half step of that if we got you, where you could cover a swing shift with an extra officer or something like that. What moves the needle enough, where we might, what are the shifts you're getting the most calls and cover, I'm looking for are there some places, because I have some ideas about where I might be able to draw funding for that. But
yeah, so I have some preliminary numbers. Year one for 6. So if we simply say we're going to put one more deputy per shift, 24/7, that's 6 deputies, 2 per shift. The first year we would have the capital cost to include vehicles, radios. So the first year is pretty expensive. Second years are still expensive, but not as steep. $195 per position year one. So for 6 would be $1.17 million, almost $1.2 million for year one for 6 additional deputies. After that, it drops to $126,000 per position, which would include all the M&S and personnel and all the pieces that go with providing a police deputy.
There need to be some kind of CIP adjustment to the wages and benefits.
Right. So this is based on current known numbers. And yeah, if there's changes in personnel costing in out years, those will drive these costs
The
up.
126 is based on this year's dollars.
Right.
I did increase wages by the 2% that we know
For this
current
coming
contract.
for the current contract.
current contract, but for out, if I was thinking about how would I fund this for 5 years, I'd have to also put an inflation index on that 126.
Right. So the simple piece of the answer is the dollar amount with I think a tight estimate. I want to reserve a little room in the conversation for our police managers to make the best assessment of where those resources would go. So,
is it
Lieutenant
a
Wilkerson,
detective,
I think I
or
could
is it
feel behind me that I missed this slide. And so now that I have the opportunity back, I will point out specifically the top left box. We spoke a minute ago of the police division, or all of the sheriff's office services operate as a system within the sheriff's office, just like the sheriff's office is part of the system of public safety with the DA and youth services and parole and probation in the larger community's public safety. So as we build pieces within our organization, we can easily put things out of whack. The sheriff's office detective team has been under-resourced at times, unbelievably. At one point, Lieutenant Wilkerson, when he was a detective, was one of 2 detectives who worked for me when I was a lieutenant, while we served the same population, the same crime rate generally we do today. These 4 detectives today serve a population of 109 direct law enforcement service, unincorporated residents of Lane County, and with 4 of them. Springfield, comparatively, 10 detectives for 60,000. Eugene is somewhere in the neighborhood of 35 detectives for 150,000, 160,000. So just local comparisons were way out of whack. I don't know at this point that the ultimate answer won't be that, yes, the best place to put this resource is add 2 deputies per shift and go from 3 to 4. That may very well be. That does, in an earlier consultation with Captain Doyle, that does put us at a level with patrol that we could divide the patrol shifts into 2 teams with opposite day off patterns. Everybody works on Wednesday as an overlap. That could, in future years, greatly reduce our overtime and training costs and enhance our ability to train our deputies, where the tactical team could all train on Wednesday. Half of our staff could train this Wednesday for defensive tactics or firearms skills, and the other half of patrol could train next Wednesday. And in 2 weeks, we have the entire patrol division through a training program with no overtime at all. So there's a lot of appeal to many different pieces, and so we can try to do an analysis on what it would look like just for patrol and whether or not we have enough data in speculative analysis to say we could move the bar and raise the call for service response. I really need to spend some time back at the office and let these guys take lead on that conversation and see where that goes. And I really don't know time-wise where to get back to you on it. But I would say, I think a deputy per shift would be a tremendous boost to the patrol group or whatever piece we felt we need to do. And there is concern maybe we need to make one of those positions a supervisor and better structure or supervision, which is also anemic in some areas in the police division. So a lot of conversation to be held on where, and I would like to have the ability to reserve some of that placement of those assets based on kind of an internal analysis of what works best. I will absolutely not say we don't need them. I just don't have a simple answer yet to where to put them most effectively.
Thanks, appreciate it.
Well, based on what you just said, it's for lay people, we hear response time, so let's put more deputies out on the road. The cybercrime part is compelling. What you just said kind of overreaches both of those. So I'm not going to ask the question now of the committee, but at the end, when at 4:25, I would like to go around the room and see, is there support for discussion for additional bodies, and let the sheriff's office if there is sufficient interest, then we could go to the sheriff and say there is sufficient interest for 3, 4, 5 deputies. Can you come back and tell us where they would go and why they would go there? So again, we go back to the professional manager to fill the priorities rather than the budget committee doing that. So I'm going to ask everybody of that in a little while. So be thinking about that, please.
Leave before I overstay my welcome. Thank you very much.
And I'm glad to see John Clegg is back.
Wow. I hadn't seen that till just now. Yeah. Thank you,
You just like it. They were easy on you.
Dubai's using the autonomous vehicles right now. Just want to let you know.
Dubai is?
They're still doing it.
Okay. We are on a break till 2:45. 15 minutes.
Just a little brief ear check on Greg.
Rickoff and Donovan Dunmeyer. All right, parole and probation. Welcome. The floor is yours.
Thank you, and I will go ahead and start. And with us today, we do have Lynn Smith, the accounting analyst for parole and probation, and as well as Jeff Kincaid, who's the management analyst for county administration, but aids with all of the components that are parts of operations. So the four of us will be talking today. I think Donovan and I will be splitting that time. First, I want to start with thank you for those who were able to attend both the work session and tour last week to look at parole and probation and the need for relocating the program. We greatly appreciate your time, and as those of you who weren't able to join us, if you have questions, we are more than happy to answer them. I'm going to talk a little bit about parole and probation. Just very quickly, think of the program as working with an average of 3,000 individuals who are under supervision, roughly evenly split between parole and probation. They're being supervised by 39 officers, a manager, 5 supervisors, about 10 staff, and a victim advocate, as well as a program specialist. They really do a remarkable job of working with a number of tools, including things like the specialty courts and transitional programs to help individuals really change their lives.
Absolutely, and you know, it's been 5 years since I've been with the county, and about 5 years ago, last month, this team actually developed their own brand. And part of that brand was really to improve the quality of life for folks in Lane County. And daily, this group is competent, committed. They're passionate about the work they do, and it just shows in every interaction. So very proud of our parole and probation team and the work that they have done within our system to reduce recidivism and really follow the mission and improving the quality of life. Current year budget changes. Since fiscal year 17-18 budget adoption, due to the incredible work of our Lane County District Attorney's Office, we've seen an increase to both our Community Corrections Act funding, our Justice Reinvestment, and in through that same vein, we were able to add an additional office assistant, an additional corrections technician, a supervisor, and 2 officers to our Lane County Parole and Probation team. As we know, our funding within parole and probation, within the Community Corrections Act, is really tied to client population. So with that, the population, the funds can be volatile for both Justice Reinvestment and Community Corrections funds. We do currently also rely on supervision fees, in which we collect. We also use supervision fees as an incentive to recognize healthy behavior. We're also utilizing grants. Currently, we utilize an arrest grant to help supervise our misdemeanor population within the domestic violence. We also have a position that we work with the Sheriff's Office, and we have a PO that's tied to alternative programs through that additional. So, and I think also within 18-19, we're also slated to have an additional PO join our team as well. The overall budget, about half of our budget really goes to personnel. And what we're looking at when we're looking at material services, this last year we were actually able to purchase utility vest carriers for our officers, and this was really in a close collaboration with our union regarding the mandatory vesting of our officers. Before that, it was an optional policy. So we've actually been able to work successfully with vest carriers to get folks vested. Also, looking at a series of pass-through dollars for treatment and services, and that's both the CCA subcontracts and Justice Reinvestment. We also have contingency funds through operational reserves, and then we also have reserve funds for our future relocation, which many of you had an opportunity to look at with our tour.
we should probably take a moment to talk about the Public Safety Coordinating Committee and have the work it provides to really give a larger vision to public safety systems approach to reducing crime and reducing, certainly on our end, reducing recidivism, getting people out of the criminal justice system. Those monies are volatile. Of course, there are state determinations for the CCA, for the CCA and the restorative justice work. There's with that, there's also determinations in terms of exactly what is the right mix in terms of services, what is the subcontracting, so what kind of treatments are needed, what kind of programming is essential to really make changes in people's lives. And that's why you see, because of some of the volatility and our need to make a commitment to these officers, that's why you see a little bit larger contingency. Yes, and then the 1.5 in the reserves is the money that we have set aside over time to prepare for the relocation of parole and probation. Yes, yes, please.
So these reserves, the operational and the future, it looks like you've put those in for a couple of years. And so do you know what the total of the reserves is at this point?
It's about 1.5 million.
Well, that's what you're proposing for next year, but you put 1.2 million in the year before, right?
So, Judy, I'd probably turn to you.
Is it the question about where the reserves for 17-18?
Well, I'm just wondering what the total reserves are. I see
for the current year.
Putting in this year, I see what you put in last year. So is last year's reserves still there?
Yes, they are, but we have to budget them every year. So for 18-19, it looks like, so there's one just for the relocation, which will be the 1.5 million. And then there's a couple other contingencies, and that's somewhat for some of the unknowns, like labor contracts.
Yeah, we're interested in the one for the relocation, so it's the future. So if I'm right, we should have $2,750,000 by the end of this fiscal year.
It's not like an expense where you're spending or reserving those amounts every single year. That is your total. So 1.5 is the new total. So the increase is the difference between the 2 years, not adding the 2 years together. Okay. Does that help? Yeah. Okay.
Although I do like your calculations better.
we simply don't have those dollars available. Do you want to talk a little bit here?
Sure. Yeah, we're looking at, let me get to there we are. So within our partnerships, we're very proud of our partnerships. We work close to provide interlocking services that really promote client accountability and rehabilitation in the community. We have really, we take, like I said, great pride in our partnerships. We actually partially given space restraints. We've actually co-located with several of our partners in the community. Currently, we share office space with the Lane County Sheriff's Office with the Sherman Center. We share space with Eugene Police, Florence Police. We've actually developed a strong working alliance and collaboration with Lane County Behavioral Health. We have an officer assigned to that team as well. Hacksaw, which would be the Homes for Good. We have 2 or 3 different outstations that we've identified with them, and they're a strong partner for us. And of course, sponsors, an incredible partner for us. And we have, and that's a partnership that's been decades in the making, but we have several officers assigned to the various sponsors' locations as well. So partnerships, take great pride in those. As far as the highlights for 17-18, I am very pleased to announce that we have a new supervisor in parole and probation, Kreisha Brunsman. This has allowed us to really fast-track policy and procedure, and it's also allowed us to really entertain, for the first time, continuous quality improvement efforts that we know are very necessary to improve the work that we're doing. Adding an additional office assistant and 2 additional officers will just be an incredible contribution, especially in reducing those workload numbers and allowing officers to really maximize the time that they have and really prioritize those resources. Developing our PTO for new hires. We've actually developed a team, and PTO is probation training officers, and we've actually brought in a new program that really emphasize it's almost like, if you can imagine, an evidence-based standard for adult learning. We've just very proud of this, and in fact, this has been in the works for a couple years, and we're in the process of introducing this to the state, and we've presented at national conferences as well through this. So a program that we're very proud of. It really supports the competencies that we're looking to hire for our officers in the future.
Can you mention just quickly there are counties that are adopting Lane County's model for this field training?
Yes. So several counties, Douglas County, Lynn County, Clackamas County, Multnomah has shown a great interest in it. And did I mention Yamhill County? So those are counties that are really on the train. We provided training. Also had San Diego County, I believe, come down, and we're able to present to them as well. So that's a big effort. Big effort. Ongoing skills program. We're always promoting that accountability and rehabilitation and that balance. And then one thing I'm also very proud of is the Justice Involved Women's Initiative. We've actually identified an officer and identified working on a team and really developing a program that will effectively address the risk and needs of our Justice Involved women.
So future challenges and opportunities. We couldn't help but throw in one last image of the parole and probation office. It's without the red line that would run from the bottom left-hand corner up to the top, across the top, and down about halfway to the side to point out where the accessible entrance to the building is. We really do need, for the myriad of reasons we've talked about in terms of simple size of the work unit to the accessibility to the safety standards. There are many reasons why we need to relocate, so that'll be an active piece of our work. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I mean, toured that place.
Hang on a
it's
second.
amazing.
Larry, do you want questions now? Or?
Yes, and my apologies for not mentioning it first. It certainly seems to work this afternoon to have questions as we go.
Okay, Dale. Okay, go ahead.
I was just going to say, having toured that place, it's amazing that you guys get any work done. I mean, between the cubby holes that are, there's no room for storage, the stuff storage is stored in the showers, trains come by right next door. I mean, I think it's amazing what you're doing, and I certainly agree you need to get a better space.
I may have missed it, but with the additional deputy district attorney, weren't we going to see CCA go up instead of down?
Yes.
Theoretically, of course. But.
Well, and we've seen CCA go up, and the numbers should absolutely reflect that.
Am I looking at the wrong?
You're looking at the handout that you received today that says parole and probation.
No, I'm looking at the budget on page 1.2.
So we gave you the detail just of parole and probation. Well, it's probably in the Dropbox.
Yeah, no, I have it here.
Yeah.
I can lightly address it, and then when we have more specifics. But on the handout, so on page 1 under resources, the community corrections lines, the first, 15, 16, there was 64, and then it went up slightly, but you'll see a huge jump from the 16, 17 to 17, 18. And it was a biennium amount that did go up.
Gotcha.
So it's the 17, 19 biennium, and then there were some specifics that PSCC, Public Safety Coordinating Council, said, this fiscal year, we're going to add this, next fiscal year, some of that. And so some of that specifics, there's a slight,
Yes.
it does show a slight reduction. But it's just,
And that was a little bit of a front-end loading. Those should be equal numbers, because of the biennium.
And I think some of that front-end loading was PSCC money that was set aside for the move.
Yeah.
So that's why you see that 250,000 jump in reserves for the future move in this budget.
But the telling element really is the jump from FY 16, 17 to FY really 7, as we think of it as 2 years, so 17, 19. Thank you, good catch.
And I think I would just add to that, parole and probation, we've definitely seen the increased numbers as a result of the good work from the district attorney's office. As of January 14, our total caseload numbers were about 2,691. Right now we're about 3,000. So we've seen a significant climb in our numbers.
Awesome. Please note, we have talked about this before. We're not going to flog that dead horse, but the high risk versus low risk numbers comparing Lane to Clackamas, Marion, or Washington, you see that we really are reversing those numbers, and that's really what we're attacking. We're focusing on those high-risk individuals and trying to get those numbers down. The earlier the intervention in an individual's criminal acts, the quicker you can turn that around and get them out of the system. We would like to see our numbers, and we think, in the coming years, you will actually see these numbers change and reverse themselves. So the propensity of our folks will be low, with the high being the smallest numbers. But that will take work over time. The caseloads are still significantly too high for officers. That is something we need to attack. We still have about 7 positions vacant. We were down to only 2 vacancies earlier this year, but with the addition of the positions, with several individuals finding promotion opportunities in other counties and leaving us for those opportunities, and a couple individuals leaving the profession, we're back up to 7 vacancies. We are attacking that. We're having great success, but even pretty significant requests from the treatment courts. We'd like to see another parole officer. We were later than we would have wanted to be in terms of getting a parole officer assigned to the Sherman Center. We understand that officer is working quite well, and we could probably use another one there as well. So, I think the demand continues to outstrip our ability to really supply officers and reduce those very large caseloads. If you talk to officers, I would venture to say that morale is high. They have bought in and really believe in the work they're doing, and they'd really like to see more officers available to get those caseloads down. With those 7 online, we need to get those filled. I'd love to be able to come back before you this time next year with those positions filled and really have an assessment of what our future need looks like. Right now, it's incumbent on us to attack those numbers.
So just as a follow-up question, am I hearing correctly that the majority of the difference between highs and lows with the counties is primarily a function of the way that parole and probation functions within the counties?
So there's I think you probably want to talk about LSCMI. Sure. And how there is data across counties that really measure the risk factors for people to continue in criminal activity. what we're seeing are folks that are pretty advanced in their skills who have had years to perfect their criminal behaviors without intervention. And I think that's what we're seeing.
Yeah, and I can speak to this a little further, and we really are talking apples to apples. I mean, when you're looking at the numbers, we all use the LSCMI, which is the Level of Services Case Management Inventory. It provides us with a accurate risk and an accurate depiction of their needs as well. And so every county through the state utilizes the same assessment. We all engage in the same inter-rater reliability exercises yearly, and so Lane County is right there in the mix with the other counties as far as our accuracy. So it really is just as a result of those are the numbers, and that's the reality for
When these assessments are done very early in their supervision experience, so it really is kind of a snapshot on the outset of their work under supervision. So it's not truly assessing what the interventions are able to do. It's really giving our officers a chance to assess that risk that they need to manage over time.
So you're saying there's similar populations and that the policing activities that basically funnel people is similar in those other counties?
I would argue they have not seen the same impact of the lack of funding strip things like rural patrol and the ability to actually jump in and intervene. Commissioner Bosevich, I think, articulated it quite well last Wednesday in talking about what that earliest possible intervention can mean throughout the county to get people early on. We've lost that capacity where these other counties have had a greater ability to continue on and engage folks earlier in their criminal careers.
Okay. Thank you.
Hold on, Greg, you have about 9 minutes left, and we've got 2 questions. Do you want to finish up?
Just very quickly, the strategic plan, this strategic plan is a great fit for the work in parole and probation. Everything, certainly the safe and healthy county. The Justice Involved Women's Initiative, which is something that has started this past year, has been absolutely tremendous. The alternative program work. Right now, Parole and Probation has an initiative with Homes for Good and sponsors, really looking at pay for success. So it's the ability to pay back for programs that are found to be effective. We think that's going to be a very telling and very helpful tool in the toolbox. Certainly you'll see with the robust infrastructure our need to relocate and find a new place in the partnerships. I think Donovan did a great job of articulating what we do. The Sherman Center, the prison diversion. I think the treatment courts, folks haven't had a chance to get to a graduation in the treatment courts, be it, veterans, the behavioral health, or the substance abuse treatment courts. They're all working quite effectively. And so we're through it now and ready to jump into questions.
I just want to go back to the slide that showed the 1,500 high risk. Could you distinguish the other counties? In other words, those numbers look a third to half of what ours are. So is it illustrating that there's 1,546 high need supervision level, high need people in Lane County, and in those other counties?
Correct.
The same supervision level is lower, the number of people is lower?
Yes, so when you're looking at this, we have ideally 3, we do have 3 classifications. You have actually 4. You have a high risk, a very high risk, which is really within that high risk
high
scope.
And very high are
in one category, and then you have medium, and then you have low, and those are really determined by cutoffs on our risk assessment.
Okay.
So points that somebody may earn as a result of their history.
And the LC, what was it, LCMI?
LSCMI.
LSCMI. So those are using the same grading techniques.
Correct.
It's not like Washington County really has lots of high ones, but they grade differently.
Right.
So they have lots of low ones.
Correct. Yeah, we're using the exact same assessments.
Yeah.
We're using the same inter-rater reliability statewide to ensure that we're all within that median.
Okay, and so are you deploying your resources to those high and very high people?
Absolutely.
Tell one of the changes you're trying to get going.
Per evidence-based practices, we would prioritize resources to the highest risk. Those are the folks that provide the highest recidivism rates. That is really the biggest bang for our buck, and focusing on those high risks.
How long has Lane County been using that statewide LSC?
I think it's been years. It's not a new assessment to the state of Oregon. Certainly, I would say within at least 10 years.
It was described as a snapshot. Can somebody start out as high and then they're low, but they're still high because the snapshot was taken when they were high?
So what you're seeing here is a snapshot as of that day. So what happens is somebody starts their supervision, we will conduct an LSCMI assessment. We'll get that baseline, we'll identify the risk needs, we'll develop case plans, and then a year later, we will reassess. And so the goal obviously is to address those risk needs to reduce that risk. And so the hope is you hope to see high-risk people gradually reduce to that low risk, right? Some folks will never get there just based on their extensive criminal history and other static factors, but most folks, we can effectively reduce their risk by addressing those identified needs.
Larry?
So just to clarify, the snapshot is on their first day?
So that snapshot is as of the day it was taken. So you have folks within that snapshot that may be a day on supervision or 3 years in supervision. So
what days? Are they taken once a year or something?
Yeah, so we will, when somebody comes out initially on supervision, we'll conduct an LSCMI, and at minimal, it'll be once a year that we'll reassess those individuals using the same assessment.
You reassess everybody?
Yes, so good question. Our low-risk folks, the best practice would really stipulate that we have limited interaction and limited involvement with those folks. And so when we're looking at mandatory reassessment, we're looking at medium and high.
That's a good question. It's not a single calendar day of the year that's given over to doing that assessment.
Right.
It's done virtually
throughout
every
the supervision period.
Although the snapshot that the state requires is, what is, as of today, what are your stats? Is that how?
Let's see, the next slide, item 1-1. Tell me, what does pay for success mean? I mean, what is it? Are you paying for it, or?
So, yeah, that's a good question. The goal is to, we do incredibly good work. I think our Lane County system has really invested in effective programs. And I think what we have done is the Pay for Success initiative really develops a list of end payers on the back end, and those can be private, public sectors. And then we identify benchmarks, and if we achieve benchmarks, then there's payment
So
as a result.
it's a federal initiative that really is focusing, results focused. So it's people who are willing to provide funding for programs that have proven success. So it's a new emerging funding model, funding tool that is trying to ensure that great programs, worthy programs, are going to get the support they need. So it is funding after the fact when the data demonstrates success. So you prove it, you develop a contract, and engage folks to help fund over a longitudinal study time to help pay for that success.
So the grant is paying for it. It's not.
It is an initiative to get new funders into the business of supporting successful programs. So think of it as a matchmaking service based on having programs that are really developing a track record of success. So it's trying to bring new monies into the equation. Private philanthropists, public dollars, but following after the fact. So it's trying to add more money to the system.
And it really is a credit, I think, to the innovation that Lane County has, and that we were selected for this, and it was very competitive.
We're the smallest community. It's Austin, Pittsburgh, DC, LA, and that literally sponsors Homes for Good and Prohibition.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thanks, Ron.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Thanks, sir.
Hi.
Oh, okay.
Can I move this in the back so we've got a few of us who need to be up here. No, we don't want to burn it. That would not be good. Good memory. Okay. You should sit there. You want to sit there? Okay. You want to hand me my name? I'm happy to sit at the end of the table. There's just a little. Yeah, and this is not after this. You should sit right there. So you already know. Yeah, Carla can do this. Okay. So I asked her specifically. Sure. Right over there. How are you? Please come right here. I mean, we can. Well, I'll grab the chair from over. Don't you worry, Lenise. We got her. Thanks. Okay. Do we have a clicker?
And now you have us.
It was the same as in the building. Now it's
Happy is best, right? And we're here to talk about safety too, Steve, so.
Health and Human Services, Karen, I'm glad you brought all of the county's staff.
Well, and I'm excited. We're here 2 days
That's about the same number of people.
in a row. So I'd like to start by introducing our team. How about that? I'm Karen Gaffney, Director, Health and Human Services.
And I'm Andrea Musicant, the Assistant Director.
Lenise Colbert, Manager of Administration.
You want me? Yeah. Okay.
I didn't know where we were going. Carla Ayers, Division Manager at Lane County Behavioral Health.
Hi, Beth Lane, Division Manager, Youth Services. And I'm Carla Tazamal, Division Manager of Developmental Disabilities Services. Jocelyn Warren, Public Health Manager. Lisa Willis, Clinical Financial Services Manager.
Steve Manella, Human Services Manager. Ron John with Community Health Center.
Lisa Nichols, Quality and Compliance Manager.
Dr. Lepke, Chief Medical Officer and Public Health Officer.
And behind you.
Lisa Robb, Manager for Trillium Behavioral Health.
And I'm Caitlin Jackson, I was the Program Supervisor at Lane Human Services.
All right. Excellent. So a couple things I would say. You'll hear from the rest of our team tomorrow when we talk about the rest of Health and Human Services. One of the attributes of our department is absolutely thinking about this work as a team. So that's why everyone's here to support the folks who are at the table today around public safety. And in fact, I was watching earlier. I know you've already talked about housing in Steve's area, and it's all connected in the work that we do. So you'll see us again tomorrow. We'll just switch up who's at the table for that presentation. Before we get through the slides, I want to take just a moment to tee up this piece, and we're going to spend a little bit more time talking about the department as a whole today, and then tomorrow we can kind of breeze through some of that before we get to the divisions that we focus on tomorrow. One of the changes in our department is there's a new director, Health and Human Services. Although you've seen me here for many years, this is actually my first budget process as the director, and I was appointed at the end of July, so it's a pleasure to be here in this role. And I'm excited to share some of the amazing work that we're doing in Health and Human Services. And clearly we'll talk about the budget as well. But the budget is really what enables us to do the work that we do serving the community. So we'll focus on that aspect as well. We're a large department with a big variety of services. In fact, that's why we're split over 2 different days. So while that's important, I want to start out by sharing a little bit about our department strategic plan that I think will help you see how we hang it all together and think about our work collectively. We absolutely will save plenty of time for questions and discussion at the end as we go through the slides, but I want to do this little piece up front just to set the stage. I know we talked about this in the budget text and that's in your book. I think page 153 in the Health and Human Services section talks about the pillars that are in Health and Human Services in our strategic plan. And those elements are really similar to how you would think about pillars in a building as setting that foundational work for the whole department. And those 4 pillars drive how we think about the work that we do. So I wanted to lift those up before we talk about the specifics of our budget proposal. The first is equity and access, and again that goes across the whole department. So really focusing on making sure that people can get access to the services that they need when they need it, and a significant focus in our department around addressing equity issues and health disparities throughout the community. So you'll hear that theme as we talk today and tomorrow. The second pillar is one specifically around prevention and integration. And for our work, that's particularly important as we think about integration. As I mentioned to you, I know you've already talked about mental health services and housing, our work in public health. These pieces are all connected when we do our job in the best way possible. And so within Health and Human Services, I think one of the business opportunities we have is to leverage those different services in a client-focused way to yield the best impact in the community. So that's a big focus for us, and I encourage you to listen for that as we move through the slides today. Our third pillar is data and analytics. We'll talk a lot more about that tomorrow when Lisa talks about our new Quality and Compliance Division. It's been a focus in our department for a number of years to better be able to use the data that we have, turn it into information, and use that for decision making and predictive analytics. So we've done a lot of work in the last several years in that area, and it's exciting for us then to be able to improve the quality of the services that we deliver. And then finally, our fourth pillar is around staff development and efficiency. In our department, we don't make widgets. We're a human-serving entity, and so really our people are a critical piece of how we do that work. So we focus a lot of effort on developing our staff and making sure that we're able to provide the best services possible. So that's a little bit of an overview about our footprint in the community, and today we're going to talk specifically about the public safety parts of our department, but I imagine we'll see that it's all connected as we move through. This is the organization chart for Health and Human Services. As I mentioned, you'll notice we have a new box from last year. The Quality and Compliance Division is new. We've highlighted behavioral health and youth services. That's what we'll talk about today. And the chart really does a good job of illustrating how they're embedded in this larger department of services that support that public safety work. And then I would call your attention to our mission at the top of promoting and protecting health and well-being. When we talk about health in Health and Human Services, it really is in the broadest sense. So it's economic well-being, it's making sure our youth are crime-free, really looking at the wellness aspect of health in Health and Human Services. The slide addresses current year budget changes, and we've actually had a number of changes since we were before you last year. We lifted up a few of the large ones on the slide. The first I alluded to is we've reorganized. Last October, we spent a significant chunk of time. When you have a new director, it's an opportunity to really look at the work and how we're delivering that work, and created a new division of Quality and Compliance by taking specific services that had been in our admin division and in our clinical financial services division and consolidating them to really focus on data and analytics and compliance. Quite frankly, so much of our funding is driven by state and federal governments that we have a lot of rules we need to comply with. So lifting up that focus on compliance and risk management as well as quality. And that reorganization has already been really yielding dividends, and as I said, we'll talk more about that tomorrow when we focus on that area of the department. I would also say we've done work in our budget to true up, particularly in youth services, and I know Nathleen will talk a little bit about that today when we get there, of making sure that we've aligned properly our services with the funding and making sure that that story is transparent and clear in the budget. So you've probably noticed some movement in the budget there to reflect that. And then finally, we have added a significant number of positions over the year through the supplemental budget process in a variety of divisions. We've had about 40 total, and today I know Carla will talk about a lot of the work we've been doing around team-based care and mental health. We've added a number of positions in behavioral health. Actually, 10 of those 40 positions have been in behavioral health, and despite that, I know you heard earlier from the district attorney that we're still short of staff to deliver on the need that's in the community. So that's been a significant add for us, and then we can talk about the other added divisions tomorrow. All right, our budget by fund type. This chart always cracks me up a little bit because it says it's just a full circle. So it says all of our funds are special revenue funds, which is true. I did also list for you the 6 different funds that are part of Health and Human Services. The divisions that we're talking about today are behavioral health, and that's located within our Health and Human Services Fund 286. And then youth services is actually split into 2 funds. They're what I think of as their traditional fund 289, and then we set up a specific fund 290 for the levy money when it came in to keep it separate. So both of those funds are in youth services. Let's talk about the budget, since this is the budget committee. The resources that come into Health and Human Services, this particular chart that was prepared reflects our operating dollars, so it doesn't have any of our reserves or fund balance in there in particular. It does reflect that we have just a little over $10 million of general fund that comes into Health and Human Services, and that's in the slice of the pie there that's fund transfers. That $15 million includes the $10 million of county general fund. And the divisions that receive the general fund and the programs are listed there on the slide. We do get county general fund. Youth services is the largest recipient of general fund in Health and Human Services, and then a small amount goes into behavioral health. So we can talk more about those. Our largest sources of revenue are state and federal dollars. That's really the bulk of the revenue that comes into Health and Human Services, and much of that is generated by fee-for-service billings in our clinics. And we can talk more about that if you'd like as well. On the expense side, you'll see the bulk of our expenses, probably not surprising to you, are in personnel costs. Again, we are in the human service delivery system, so we need people in order to deliver those services. We do have a significant chunk in material and services also, but a large portion of that is actually going back out into the community in agency payments to nonprofits. I would imagine almost every nonprofit you can think of in this community receives a contract and some funding through Health and Human Services. And so those are all reflected in the materials and services column. And then finally, the tiny little column that's marked capital expenses is money that we've budgeted for next year to complete a remodel in our methadone program to expand access there. And I know Carla will talk a little bit about that when we talk about behavioral health. Partnerships. We could not do this work without the partnerships that we have in the community, and there really aren't enough slides in the deck to be able to articulate all of those partnerships. We lifted up a few of our key partnerships that I'll talk about today as it relates to our public safety work. The first is our Mental Health Summit, which is a group that's been meeting for several years now and has officially become affiliated now with the Public Safety Coordinating Council. Council. It's that place where, as a system, we talk about the intersection of behavioral health, mental health, but also chemical dependency and the criminal justice system. So that group that meets monthly, 7:30 in the morning, it includes municipal court and circuit court judges, the sheriff and his staff attend, the district attorney and her staff, defense attorneys, and behavioral health providers, both our in-house providers and in the community, participate in that group. And it really has been a fantastic forum for us as a community to think about how do we better address the growing needs for mental health services in the public safety system, and even more importantly, how do we divert people who don't belong in the public safety system from ever entering that in the first place. So that's an important partnership for us. Today I would also lift up, I think, our nonprofit service providers. Again, Lane County Behavioral Health from the beginning has been a blended system. Some counties provide all of their services in-house and others contract all of it out, and we've done both. It provides consumer choice, and it also allows people to develop lots of different types of services. So we work closely with nonprofits in the community for mental health delivery. And then finally, the expansion of treatment courts has been huge for us. We've had drug courts in Lane County for a long time, and recently have added municipal and circuit mental health courts and our veterans court. Again, those opportunities to really address people's needs early on in the criminal justice system and resolve them for people to be able to be productive, get jobs, get housing in the community. So I think now it's Carla.
Okay. All right. Good afternoon. Along with what Karen has talked about, I want to talk a lot about our collaborations within and between our divisions. So for the first one, our adult outpatient, our multidisciplinary team-based care, a lot of that collaboration and integration is within our primary care site that we have at Behavioral Health, and there's a lot of work, and we have a team-based care that works between primary care and mental health so that we're addressing all of the needs for the individual. For our child and adolescent program, our collaboration that we're working on currently is with public health. We're rolling out an evidence-based practice for addressing the youth suicides in our community. The post-vention strategy is called Connect, and will provide the support that we need to help reduce the rate of suicide in our community because it is such a large issue. And for our methadone program, to address the opioid issue, we're adding an additional mental health provider in that facility so that we're not only addressing the alcohol and drug issues, but we're addressing the mental health needs as well for those individuals. Because many of them have mental health as well, and in the past we haven't been able to do that. We are also increasing the capacity by adding Suboxone to that program, and that's a collaboration with the community health centers. Okay, and so for our clinic transformation, we're continuing to expand our capacity to serve the community needs. With the additional positions, this has created better staff support and retention, as well as better care for the individuals in the community. In the past, we haven't been able to, if an individual wasn't showing up for treatment or for services, we haven't had the capacity to go out into the community, meet with them, see what's going on for them, what are their barriers, how can we address those barriers, and get them into receiving services so they don't end up in the jail or end up somewhere else that isn't the best for them. And then our final piece is improving our data tracking. So much like for the Stepping Up initiative, the collaboration with our new Quality and Compliance Division will allow us to better track outcomes, specifically as it relates to our Stepping Up initiative, producing and tracking outcomes in the jail related to the services we are providing, addressing risk as well as recidivism. And then the final thing that I'll leave you with is one of our success stories, which we have many, but this one really touched my heart, and that we had a gentleman that we've been working with for about almost a year now who has been homeless for the last 8 years. using drugs and alcohol to address the homelessness, right? Because it's hard to live on the streets and not use. And we've recently been able to get him housed, and he has stopped using drugs and alcohol and recently got part-time employment. So huge success story for us. And we have other ones that are similar to that, but really wanted to leave you with a positive note of all of the good work that we've been doing and the support that we've received from all of you. So thank you.
And the catalyst was housing.
What's,
The
yes,
catalyst was
yes, yes.
That was my second.
You've now used both of your chips.
Ready for youth services. So I want to say I started off my first half of the day at a conference here in town for the treatment of sex offenses amongst youth, and one of the workshops was all around youth and their access of pornography. So a lot of the slides were showing us what the kids were seeing, and I was so pleased to know that my day will end with slides with graphs and numbers. The other stuff that I'm doing all morning. So, alrighty. So my name's Natalie Lane. I know. This is the day in the life of youth services. All right, youth services is 24/7. We have approximately 75 staff, 8 program service areas, and we are now housed in 3 different buildings on the Service campus. Our administrative services oversees all of our data management and grants administration and accounting for our division. Detention services, as you know, with the levy, we have 16 beds, so 8 that are funded by general fund and 8 that are funded out of local options, and we house youth there that are ages 12 to 17. Over the last year, we've had quite a few youth that are in there for Measure 11 crimes or being charged as adults, and so if I had to guess over the course of this year, we've probably had maybe 8 kids or so, which is a lot for us. And so not necessarily all different incidents. They were, for some of those, they were committing their crimes together. So it was one incident, but several youth. And so, our average length of stay for kids in detention is about 10 days. For our Measure 11 youth, they could be up there for, 10 months to a year as they're waiting for their case to go through. We did work with the Sheriff's Office this year as well to update a memorandum of understanding between our agencies to ensure that youth are staying in the youth facility and not going over there until they're adults. And so it's great work together. Also did a lot in our detention services over this last year to ensure that the way that we're engaging youth and programming with them is the way that it should be. And so we've done a lot of work around that, and it's looking really good. Our MLK Education Center is our education center that we partner with Lane ESD to come in and provide services. So they do instruction for our kids in detention. I know I just call them kids the whole time, so sorry. Our kids in detention and our kids in our Phoenix treatment program, and then also community youth who for a very number of reasons aren't able to do their schooling in their home school, always with the goal of getting them back in there, but they're able to do some credit recovery when they're with us. Nutrition services, we do about 50,000 meals and snacks per year, and between detention and Phoenix, our youth in school, and they also provide all of the meals for our youth when they're out on their cruise and doing community service work, and our culinary arts program is also housed in there as well. Program services is our medical, so all of our medical services for kids in detention and in our Phoenix program. Dental, we partner with Whitebird, and they come in once a week and do dental work for our kids that are in detention in Phoenix. And then also that's where our mental health folks are housed as well. And so we have 2 mental health positions that provide services primarily to kids in detention, crisis intervention, and then also kids that are on probation as far as doing mental health assessments for them as well. And then also trying to really get them connected to mental health providers in the community. Our restorative services unit does our diversion opportunities, including victim offender dialogues. Also does our minor in possession class, our victim services. So for our youth crimes, every victim is contacted, and so we don't have it at a certain level, that they have to be involved in, going to hearings and that sort of thing, that all of our victims, regardless of what the crime is, have contact by us. And our diversion opportunities, we've really worked on those over the course of this year to make sure that kids in all parts of the county have access to diversion services, which is really important for kids because going through diversion, and if they successfully complete, they can get that charge expunged from their record, which is really important as they move forward in life. And so really making some great efforts to have that available countywide, including in Florence. We'll be starting here in August, I believe, looking at Caitlin over there, doing 4 MIP classes out there a year, so those families aren't having to drive in to do that. So, and they also do all of our mediations for our domestic relations cases. Supervision services are for youth that are in formal and informal probation, and so those kids generally have multiple referrals or medium or high risk, so they're not going through the diversion route, they're going our other route. And we've done a lot of work this year around DMC, disproportionate minority contact, to develop a program service matrix so that all kids coming through, at the same risk level and the same number of referrals and types of crime, regardless of their skin color, are receiving the same set of services from us. So, and then our treatment program, I thank you all for approving last year additional funds to be able to move Phoenix out of a detention pod and into a treatment center. And that has been a wonderful improvement for youth. And that's, again, a 16-bed, part general fund, part local options for males and females. And being able to be out there means that they can have visits with their family and they're playing ping pong and basketball and those sorts of things versus being behind glass to visit with their family. Because again, these kids aren't detained. They have voluntarily entered a treatment program. It also allows them to get out in the community more often, to do community events without invasive searches when they come back through. So that has been a significant improvement for our youth there. Yes. Alrighty. So Karen had mentioned about our alignment of services. So you'll notice there's some moving in the budget. It's the same services, similar staffing, and same money, but really aligning that into the program units that the money's going into the program unit where the services are being provided. So they're shifting in there, but it's the same services and the same amount of money there. We had a federal drug court grant which ends in October, and so that grant will be going away, but our services will absolutely still be continuing in that, and so we've just absorbed some of the grant money into our existing staff as far as being able to provide those services. And it's a really intense program for kids that are really working with kids that are coming up to us with criminal behavior, but largely brought to us through their drug use. And then certainly a need for residential treatment options for kids that are, which might sound funny because we have one, but for different kinds of kids, kids that have needs that aren't going to be served well in there, and they generally are kids with high mental health needs and sometimes also with developmental disabilities. And that is across the state and probably across the country, a need for more of those specific types of kids.
So, good afternoon. I have the pleasure of talking about the highlights of what's going on in behavioral health and youth services. And clearly from Karen, Carla, and Nathalie, they have given you a lot of information. So a couple of other things that I want to point out is that behavioral health has been able to increase access to services to over 200 more individuals, which, as you can see from the FTE that was added, that we've been able to reach out more to folks and bring more folks into the behavioral health center. So for youth services, there's been an increase, surprisingly, in the marijuana offenses due to the legalization of marijuana. So they're really focused in that area, working with youth. That Nathalie had mentioned regarding the MIP classes. And youth services really focused on earning restitution for victims and have captured over $23,000 this past year. And the youth have provided about 8,000 hours of community service, which is pretty fantastic in the community. So some of our future challenges and opportunities, you've heard about opiate treatment, and we're looking for more resources for opiate treatment, looking at grants out there, federal and state grants, and also, as Carla mentioned, the new Suboxone program that will be at the methadone treatment facility. And then we're also always looking for more options for youth, for residential programs. the mental health crisis capacity, as you all are very well aware of. We're continuing to look for opportunities on how to partner with nonprofits and just additional resources. And then, of course, supportive housing, which we hear a lot about and really focused on, it's at the top of our list, and really focused on opportunities in the community to get additional resources in that area. And then, so Lane County Health and Human Services, specifically behavioral health and youth services, is clearly in alignment with the Lane County strategic plan, as you can see here. If you can see that, you might have something in front of you to, but under Safe and Healthy County, clearly we're looking at enhancing or increased access to prevention and treatment services, enhancing mental health services to the youth corrections arena, under vibrant communities, strengthening restorative opportunities for youth and families using evidence-based practices, all the equity work that we're doing with all the committees. We have multiple committees, as you can, and advisory committees that are working on this. And then under robust infrastructure, sort of youth services is offered space that, basically to be able to provide space to other divisions in order for us to be efficient with costs. And then we talked about new facility development with our methadone treatment program remodel, and in the future potentially adding another wing to behavioral health. And then, of course, under our people and partnerships, Health and Human Services is really focused on trauma-informed practices, working on not reducing any additional occurrences of trauma, and talking to staff and also the folks that we serve. And then all of our relationships, Public Safety Coordinating Council, and many, many nonprofits. So, thank you, and do you have any questions for us?
Yeah.
I just had a question. It's relatively small, but overtime was looking at doubling. Is that due to like staff shortage or?
In youth services in particular, if you want to talk about that.
Yeah, so just about 2.5 years ago, in work with LCPOA around the overtime contract, we used to have staff a lot of our overtime with extra help positions. And just over 2 years ago, it was decided that we can't do that, and that we need to first be offering all of the overtime to staff. And so this is the second budget cycle from that. And so last year, or the year that we're currently in, as we were halfway through the year, we had already done our whole overtime budget. And so we weren't quite aware of how much overtime people would want to work as we were doing those other budgets. So this budget reflects what we're expected to actually spend this year. And those are for overtime shifts. And so one thing that we've done to try to manage the amount of overtime is to come up with critical staffing. And so if we're staffing at this level and there's this number of youth either in detention or Phoenix, that we only fill those shifts. If not doing so would bring us lower than that. And so, but that's what that is. Yeah. And it's largely a lot of also shift from what used to be budgeted in extra help when we were able to use those positions in a different way than we can now.
Could you go back to that strategic?
Probably.
Somewhere, Heron Center. What's happening with that lately?
That is a great question. Carla, do you want to talk about that? And it really comes down to our growing behavioral health program and needing space. So you remember when we purchased the Heron Center, don't you?
Right.
Yes, I know.
So we have two parts to the Heron Center, right? You have the Heron Center space and then the space right next to it that's 6,500 square feet. And so the space next to it, due to the fact that our forensic program has gotten so big, we are out of capacity at Lane County Behavioral Health. So in the interim, we want to move that team over to that space, and then they'll use that space until the goal is in 5 years to be able to build another wing at Lane County Behavioral Health to be able to accommodate the different programs that we have.
So it's a nonprofit back there.
Trauma Healing Center?
Yeah, so that's, you gotta take them their space.
Well, they've been leasing from us and they will be moving, yes. Yeah.
And they've already found a space, and they're very excited about that space.
Yeah, we, for those of you who weren't here, years and years, maybe 15 years ago, I think we had a need for space at behavioral health and partnered with then Hacksaw to purchase the building, and then Lane County Behavioral Health has been paying for that since the purchase. So that's space that we're moving behavioral health back into. We've been in and out of that space a couple times over the years.
Thank you.
So question I have, youth services again. So youth services, so increase in marijuana offenses, 123.5% increase. And then the community service hours, restitution collected. So on the increase, is the increase because it's actually increasing, or is the increase because we're looking for it more?
You know what, I don't,
if you gather
yeah,
that.
I mean, if I don't know the answer to that. My
Okay.
sense of it is that it's far more available since it's become
Yeah.
legal. And so I don't, my sense is not that law enforcement is now looking for it more in ways that they weren't. I think it's just far more accessible now than it was before it became legal. And so, although it's not legal for them to purchase, there is much more of it around for them to easily get.
So and along those same lines, so and while you don't have it listed here, so underage drinking, is that increasing as well, or what is the what do you see from that perspective?
I'm going to ask Caitlin
Okay.
today because she's our MIT person.
We've not seen a noticeable increase in alcohol.
Okay.
Minor imposition of alcohol violations.
And a lot of that, because that's obviously readily available, but after a while, is it, you just kind of see it maybe leveling off, and is that the hope maybe with the, so the 123.5% on marijuana, like you said, is readily available, which means all of a sudden it's there. So that may be a different look next year compared to, say, this year. Is that
Well, I think what we would expect, as with, it's always been interesting to me during that debate when people would say, well, marijuana is no worse than alcohol. Well, alcohol is actually a pretty bad thing in the community, and I'm sure the sheriff could talk about impacts of alcohol in the community. By being legal, it's so much more available to kids, and so while that number may stabilize in marijuana, it's going to stabilize at that higher level. Just like alcohol may have stabilized, but it's stabilized at a very high level.
What kind of pressures does that put on staff? Does that put that much additional pressures on staff, or maybe?
I think we can talk some about the staff here, and then I have no doubt public health would love to talk about marijuana tomorrow too.
That's fine.
It's significant.
We have gone from 8 classes a year to 12 classes, we were doing 8 classes, now we're going to 24 plus 4 over there, 28 classes. We've gone from 8 classes to 28 classes for offering stuff around, our classes around MIPUs. And I think largely a lot of kids will also, they get them from their family members too, and so it's not like, they're needing to shop around and afford the same way that they're able to now. Yeah.
Okay, and that's why I asked, because I know this was more focused about the youth services, and I just kind of want to get an idea of what you're up against from that perspective. So, thank you.
Commissioner Ford?
Oh, thank you. I think really quickly, earlier the DA was talking about the difficulty of getting people who weren't housed into court. And you said something similar, Carla, regarding we haven't had resources to get with clients in the community to address their needs. Is that because of the housing situation, or is that in some part because of the housing situation?
Well, I think there's a couple of yes, housing is definitely a part of that, because people aren't housed and you don't know where they're going to be, you don't know where to look for them or how to find them. So that is one component. The other component is having the staffing that can address that need and go out and locate these folks and try to get them engaged in services, whether it's mental health court or services with us.
So with an address, it's easier than just going down to the corner and hoping you run into somebody.
Well, and if I could just add briefly to that answer, I think as part of the county administrator's budget address, you had an opportunity to look at the data from our Fuse project, and that was our pilot of what would happen if we provided housing. That was our primary engagement. Engage people, get them housed. What would happen in terms of their outcomes related to healthcare costs and related to public safety, and it was amazing the impact that housing had on the very topics that we're talking about here today. So I would say there's an absolute data connection between those things.
And Mr. Chair, I will not follow that course any further. I think it's become pretty evident that housing is a critical factor. And when we look at it as top left-hand corner of our strategic plan, then I think we all acquiesce that housing is a critical need. The second one is that last week, Commissioner Lycan and I attended the Teen Suicide Summit. And a number of you were there. Carly, you were there. Dr. Warren, you were there. And they were talking about Hope Squads. And that's not a county initiative. That's something that Dr. Bradshaw was putting forward. And toward the end, got a lot of support from the entire group, it seemed. It was a little bit like pulling teeth initially, it seemed. But my question there is, as we devote the considerable resources that we have devoted to suicide and the considerable staff resources to teen suicide in particular, do you foresee us working with the nonprofits even more, and with the initiatives such as one that might be the Hope Squads? Is that can we look at the future and potentially hope for a marriage there?
I think absolutely there's an opportunity to grow efforts in this community around suicide prevention, both adolescent suicide prevention, and quite frankly, we have a significant suicide issue among adults as well. So I would again put that issue on our list of initiatives that's woefully underfunded. Right now, the resources that we have that are dedicated to suicide prevention are exclusively those that come to us in the public health side from state public health, which fund one coordinator for suicide prevention in the community. And Roger does amazing work, and absolutely he's been in contact with Dr. Bradshaw, and they're talking a lot about what would it be like for schools, because it's really the schools that would sponsor the Hope Squads, which is for those of you who weren't at the conference, it's really a youth peer intervention that has shown great promise in the data in Utah, I believe is the state where it was. So yes, I think that there's an opportunity to continue to partner with the schools in supporting their efforts around suicide prevention. It's a critical issue in our community.
And we, Dr. Bradshaw asked the question generally, what can you do to each group that was there? And the schools, of course, stepped forward, and Springfield stepped forward saying that they're piloting a program. Well, we have an FQHC in Springfield schools, so it seemed like a natural connection there that our FQHC would provide some form of resource. And also the discussion came up regarding the school-based health center in Bethel. Well, Bethel's not the only one that has it, but so the potential for schools and the county partnering to identify ways for kids I use the term kids too, to help, but I don't say kiddos ever.
That's smart.
Okay. For youth, to assist youth and to identify ways to notice when the kid is displaying signs that potentially could be a signal.
Well, and really being sure we're wrapping supports around those young peer mentors who are in that position as well. So I think having a solid, structured, data-driven program is an excellent place to start. And Carl, do you want to talk about the work that we do with the school-based health centers?
Yeah, sure. So currently we have clinicians that are housed in, not housed. They spend days at the schools, and they provide mental health therapy for kids as they come into the counseling department. So that's just readily available, a service the kids can access, and they do, and they have. And it's to the point where our clinicians at the schools are full as far as the number of kids, but they continue to try to take more kids in and provide that support. I think a piece that's missing is we're not in all the schools. I think that would be really helpful to provide additional services. I know Bethel reached out to us, and we've been working with them and getting an MOU in place so that we can be in their school more often and provide that support. And we're not there every day of the week, and quite honestly, every day of the week would be really well for them. We would meet much more of the need if we were there all the time.
Excellent.
And that's a program we were able to fund with state grant
Yes.
dollars that
Yes.
came to us.
So one last very little thing is that we already do have an established partnership with schools. And when Springfield is looking at a pilot program, potentially, while we don't want pilot programs to be the be-all and end-all, it is simply a pilot program. And, the time is now for action. We, I'll be interested to hear, Mr. Chair, and to the committee, how we are partnering with schools and leveraging their resources and our resources to get more than 1+1.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you.
So Karen, you did mention that this is the budget committee.
Yes.
So you have one big budget, it's $117 million. Do you have it broken down by divisions any place?
It's actually on page 155 in your book, kind of the last half of that page shows the division breakdown. And then certainly, Lenise is here to answer any of your difficult questions because she has all the division-specific budgets with her here. So yes, we have all of that available.
Well, it would be helpful to have a little more detail than just the total amount for each division. I mean, somebody put this whole big thing together.
That would be Christine.
And as we mentioned, we didn't do every division in the county, but we can definitely print those for you.
Yeah,
So
I'd like to see
if
it.
you want for the H&H just divisions, all of them.
Pardon me? Yeah.
So they are there. They just didn't have a print key.
Oh yes, it is all in the
Create
system.
the charts and then we'll, yes, we'll get them.
Okay, I have one last question, and that you can answer this tomorrow. A lot of you will be back. And my question is, do we have a protocol? Because so many people in the community with mental health issues come into your world. Do we have a protocol for early detection of a potential future shooter? Do we have a way to identify your thought, get it into somebody that's going to then look at that or put that individual perhaps under some sort of microscope or scrutiny, so we don't get embarrassed and A, don't have a mass shooting in Wayne County, and B, as we've all seen around the country, a lot of people were well known to mental health folks and fell through the cracks. So good questions to work into tomorrow.
Well, or actually, Carla, in your assessment process, do we assess for that at all?
So the problem is it's not always predictive. So there are some issues and challenges with that, with doing that. Now we have an LSCMI, which is the level service case management inventory. It clicked. If I look at you, it clicks. So the level service case management inventory, and it's a risk assessment that you do based on criminogenic needs for an individual. So that will allow you the information to determine if somebody's low, medium, or high risk, but it's not predictive. So it isn't going to tell you that a person necessarily would go out and do that, and I don't know that we have that level of research completed, but it is a tool and we do use it.
It would seem to fit under a safe, healthy county or as an issue that maybe could rise in terms of taking a look at that. Okay, we're out of time.
One last thing, and so just to remind us, so Monday the 21st will be the 20th, which you can believe it, 20th anniversary of the Thurston shooting. And the reason why I bring this up, because Dennis, you asked a really good question. So prior to that, and I know sheriff and the deputies could also talk about this as well at a later meeting. But prior to that, we didn't have laws on the book for holds. If you think about that at the time, Now there's laws in the book for holes to do the assessments that weren't there before, because what people forget is that the shooter took a weapon before he actually engaged in the shooting, but yet there weren't the laws in the books for the hold at the time. And if you think about that, since that happened, at least in the state of Oregon, you can say that when it comes to schools, it's been somewhat limited to what's happened. And another program that came out of that was called BK4K, By Kids for Kids. And that was a thing where kids actually were really engaged in what was happening with their schools. And to find out if they heard something, they would immediately report to law enforcement. So I just wanted to add that part. But thanks for asking that question.
Yeah, thank you.
Maybe we talk a little bit more tomorrow, but we're out of time. Thank you all.
Thank you.
For the work you do and for being here.
Thank you.
Oh, and you two over there too.
You're staying for the vote. Yeah.
Yeah, I have to stay for the next one.
That was silly.
Trying to get me in trouble.
Okay, go ahead.
Ready? Okay. Thanks, Chair Hedgemans and Budget Committee. Present with me, you already met, Nathleen, and we will go through the presentation about the jail and youth service levy. And I think for this one, it'd probably work best if I just zip through the slides, and at the end we can speak to it as long as you wish to, and then there's not a lot of slides, so I can back up easily if we need to review something. So with that, we'll jump in. I'll start with a little bit of history, just so we all are current on recognizing the levy and its foundation. So it started in 2012 with a campaign effort after a lot of budget cuts in the county that hit both youth services and the jail especially hard. We were finding ourselves with some of the lowest jail capacity for local offenders that we had seen in the county in many, many years. And we spent some time with then Sheriff Turner, led an effort, meeting with community members, and we just had a very basic conversation with the community of what's important to you, explaining the current status of public safety and asking them where their priorities fell. The result of that was strong support in the community for a levy to support jail and youth services. And so in May of 13, voters approved a 55-cent per assessed value of $1,000 on real property, with the promises of minimum of 255 local jail beds, 8 treatment and 8 detention beds, and the addition of that the funds are used exclusively for jail and youth services operations, and that these funds will be kept in a separate account and audited annually. We have to date met each of those mandates of the levy ballot language and continue to do well on the audits. In 16 and 17, we began the conversation of the collections of the jail levy. Revenues were higher than anticipated. We were not spending it as fast as we had forecast we would. We had other revenues that were continued to be put to, especially jail budget, that were not anticipated in what was initially a very conservative 5-year budget forecast. And so we found ourselves with a substantial reserve in the sheriff's office under levy revenues. And so we had the conversation the last 2 budget years to reduce that levy amount initially to a total of 38 cents, and then last year we continued it 1 more year at that same rate, which is where we are today. We, just about a year ago, were successful with a renewal of the levy at near 73%, which gives us 5 more years of secure funding for the jail and youth services, which is 5 years from July 1 coming. So 5 years out yet. Positive impacts of this levy to date, bless you. We have increased jail beds by 293% since the levy passed. We're holding the highest capacity we've seen since 2000, so 15 years of jail capacity for local offenders. We're currently using 81% of the county jail capacity, but we're probably at the maximum capacity under the current funding. While there still remains 89 vacant beds in the jail, that we could hold 89 more inmates. The funding is, I think, about maxed out with the absorption of the 50 jail bed costs from the Marshal Service. So the goal in focusing in specifically at the jail, our goal has been, as we have rebuilt jail capacity, to increase the services, to stabilize the individuals, address their criminogenic needs, and to try to find the most successful way to reintroduce them back to the community. We are not just a criminal warehouse. That's an easy way to do it. That's the inexpensive way to do it. But we are providing important services that are making our community safer. It makes our jail safer, it's making our staff safer, and also substantially has improved the safety of our inmates in many ways. We've done this through a great partnership with Lane County Behavioral Health, in addition to enhancing our general medical provider contract of behavioral health services, mental health services, the direct partnership with Lane County Behavioral Health for the additional mental health services specialists, which we, I think, talked about last year. We've implemented that, and we've had the staffing online and have started to move that program forward. Providing classes within the jail that address the cognitive behavioral therapy, socialization, to include Captain Dan's favorite, yoga, art and music therapies. These are in addition to all of the other standard services we've seen in our jail for years around the religious services and others, but we're focusing on enhancing these. And the behavioral health specialists, mental health specialists from behavioral health, one of their focuses in the discharge planning is to try to find a way to continue that these services that are begun in the jail are continued when these people are released back into our community, to, with any luck, having a longer time between return to the jail, if not a prevention of returning to the jail. Just 2 weeks ago, we've increased our mental health treatment-focused housing from what was just a 10-bed pod in the jail to a new, different area of the jail that now has 24 beds, so went from 10 to 24 just 2 weeks ago. We plan to expand that to the full wing of that section of housing to 48 beds, focused specifically on mental health focused housing, where these services will be provided on a daily basis. This provides substantial more time out of cell. This area of the jail is much more open to sunlight and a better atmosphere to address all of these issues for these folks. I will let youth services speak to youth services for a minute.
Yeah, so it sounds pretty similar to what I just said a few minutes ago. So our detention beds went from 8 to 16, and also our treatment beds, and also to have designated intake coverage 24 hours a day for when law enforcement are bringing in youth. And so our goal always for kids that are coming in, if they are brought in on non-detainable charges or after we do a risk assessment, which we've just started to do within the last year and a half for every youth that comes in the door, determine the public safety risk factors and if the kid needs to stay with us or not, and then we'll try to get them out to an appropriate placement if they don't need to be with us. And then we're able to hold the youth with the highest public safety risk, and certainly I mentioned earlier that the length of stays for our kids who are being charged as adults is rather lengthy, and so there are times that takes up a significant number of the beds that we have there, but we haven't had to do releases due to capacity in any real way over the course of the last year. Expansion of the treatment beds. And then also, it's so important to be able to serve our kids in our community. So again, we partner with Center for Family Development, and a large part of our treatment is family therapy in addition to the individual stuff we're doing with the kid. Because for many of these kids, not all, but for many of these kids, if we just have them in treatment with us for 4 to 6 months and they go right back into their same family situation, it's not going to be a successful transition for them or for the community. And so I really appreciate the added work that's not required by VRS standards that we do around that family component of it in there. And then also being able to have options for both males and females. And so an interesting thing about having there's many interesting things about having a co-ed program, but an interesting thing about having a co-ed program is that in a co-ed setting, boys tend to do a little bit better than they would than if it was all males, and girls tend to do a little bit worse than it would be if it was all females. And so we can all ponder why that might be the case. And we've actually over this past 6 months or so had 4 girls at one time, and that was almost the most number of girls that we've had in the program at any one time, because it still is largely for males that are in the program. Just because most of the kids that are coming to us are more males than they are females. So yeah.
So that brings us to our request, Youth Services and Sheriff's Office combined, request of you, the Budget Committee. As of April 2018 this year, we have filled all of the positions in the Sheriff's Office created by the levy, somewhere in the neighborhood of 50, most of, if not all of those deputy sheriffs. The jail reserves, the levy reserves from the Sheriff's Office share of the revenue have been reduced to a level that will provide for a 1 year of operations, which I recall being the request or the sort of direction of this group that seemed to be a reasonable approach to take with those reserves. So they've been spent down to that level. We are requesting that the levied amount, while it's authorized at 55 cents per $1,000 assessed value, we're currently, you see, at 38 cents, which is 8 cents to youth treatment services and detention, and 30 cents to the Sheriff's Office. We are proposing and requesting that this committee recommend a 51.5 cent per $1,000 assessed value, which remains 8 cents for youth services and increases the Sheriff's Office revenues to 43.5 cents per $1,000, which is combined makes the 51.5 cents. Now, this is still less than what the voters approved the authority to be levied, I think this will carry us forward through this next year. Whether or not it remains reduced in subsequent years, we'll have to see. This does provide a little bit of wiggle room in future years' growth. But like I said, I think we're maxed out, at least at jail capacity, where any substantial efforts to increase jail capacity will exceed the amount of revenue provided under the current levy. So this is clearly what appears to cover our needs for this budget year, and I still remain at the same position I had before. I do not feel it's appropriate to collect money we don't need to spend this year, and so I still ask that we collect only what's needed, which appears to be the 51.5 cents. And with that, I have questions for the levy.
Gail and Larry.
I want to say that I think most of us remember what the CVRs were like prior to the levy. Just anecdotally, what are you experiencing with CVRs now? Obviously, they still happen, but the types, I guess.
Right. So we hold all violent person crime So clearly, all Measure 11, the very worst of the worst, violent crime, and anything that is defined by statute as violent crime, violent person crime, violent felony. And we're holding far beyond that. What we're struggling today still is any misdemeanor level crimes sentenced to jail or pretrial, except domestic violence. So we're holding misdemeanor domestic violence effectively, but all other misdemeanors, even if they're person crime, generally it's not a violent crime if it's misdemeanor. And felony, drug, and property crime are really what we see being released from the jail. Weapons charges, drug crime, property crime, and misdemeanors. So until we have a way to really restore substantial capacity to the jail, depending on what you look at for comparisons, national comparison says we should have 1,100 jail beds in this county for local offenders. The sheriff's offices across the state of Oregon average would indicate we should have 600 jail beds. Our jail bed capacity is built beds at 507. We have a total capacity of 471 with the federal cap. So we're under built to be Oregon average, and even if we were to max out what we have available, I still think we would see some level of capacity-based releases at the very low level of criminal behavior.
Barry?
So is the 51.5 cents reflected in the proposed budget?
That's how we have built our budget that we submitted to the county budget office, was based on the corrections division is funded based on the sheriff's office share of the levy revenues being 43.5 cents. And I would assume youth services built theirs continuing on 8 cents.
Quick question, Sheriff. So if someone comes to me and asks, okay, well, why is the levy amount increased by 35% year over year? What are the 3-4 bullet points that basically justify that? Let me recap what I thought I heard. Part of it is that we were actually spending down previously collected funds, so that was subsidizing last year's collections. And what else makes up that difference?
So 2 parts really. We've spent down the reserve, which was a subsidy for the last 2 years. Mm-hmm. The reserve had reached right at $30 million, which was extraordinary as far as what we thought we would collect compared to what came in. And we were underspending what we had projected because we had no idea it would take us 5 years to hire 50 people. And so we are now fully staffed. We have added jail capacity beyond where we thought we would ever be, so we're spending more than we anticipated we were. We've realized that jail levy revenues go farther, the levy revenues go farther than we thought they would. And so now that we're no longer subsidizing this year's budget with the reserves, we're not spending down the reserves anymore this year at all. It's all levy revenue. And we have substantially more services being delivered. We've essentially, we have the budget we'll be spending everything that we've planned to this year. In the last 5 years, we just weren't spending it as fast, and so we were banking it. And so that's really, those 2 things you hit it exactly. Is on the reserves are gone, spent to where we're not going to use them anymore, and then we've added substantial service delivery.
So also we've lost some revenue, right? U.S. Marshal.
Yeah, that's the added service delivery under levy funds. So we transferred $2 million, just short of $2 million of Marshal revenue to levy revenue, and increased our annual operating costs demands on the levy.
So am I correct in saying that the services as they're built in operational right now is going to be paid for directly by the levy for this year?
Expected,
so 1-to-1 match.
Expected revenues this year, we do not anticipate adding anything to the reserve. We don't anticipate having to use the reserve to balance at the end of the year.
And you don't have any planned changes in services?
Not planned for this, in the immediate future. We'll have some evaluations down the road as we
see how everything's working with this added capacity at the local level. We talked about that in the earlier presentation of the Sheriff's Office. Generally, as we add services, we see pressures on other areas, so there may be some adjustments downstream that we'll evaluate.
Sure. I think last year's vote really spoke to what people feel about the jail and so forth, so I think you have the support there. It's odd for people to see this 35% kind of jolt, but I feel good about it. So.
I think if we would have, in year one of the levy, had been able to hire 100% of our staffing adds and go immediately to the capacity we're at today, we would have been at 55 cents for the last 5 years. We got a slower start for a number of reasons and had a best case scenario in a 5-year budget than we had on a conservative estimate. So.
I just have one quick question. I think with a lot of the other departments, we see capital improvement happening. What is the lifespan of the jail building itself? Or
it's over.
It's over. Well, I guess like the where you're forced to do something, or is there be forced?
Well, part of it is over. Part of it is we're seeing structural shifts in the settling of the facility. We've got some doors that are gapped this high at one side and tight at the other, and get shaved a little bit each year as that part of the building sinks. We do have some of the jail portions are newer. What year was the East and North Annex?
98.
So in 88 we had an annex built, and 10 years later in 98 we had a couple more pod annexes built. So there's a portion of the jail that's newer and more modern, including its features of door controls, electronic, as opposed to key access everywhere else in the main jail. So we still have vacancy capacity within the jail, so it's really feels kind of awkward to start engaging on bond discussion to build a bigger jail when we don't have the funding to operate a higher capacity jail. But we are starting to see facility impacts that we do have pressures within the jail on our inmate management and medical services areas, where the medical services is arguably undersized for in-house medical for the inmate population we serve and the high needs of the inmate population we serve. I saw something just recently, an LCOG document that says our most recent measured mentally ill population in jail is now 65%, which was much more on target of national averages, but we're not gaining ground locally. We're still slipping to higher jail populations of mentally ill. They demand a much higher level of medical service throughout our jail. They also drive much of our space limitation impacts in our segregation section of the jail. And so those are very limited. They were not expanded when the jail was expanded in those 88 and 1998 expansions. So there are a number of things that if we did have some substantial capital to raise a portion of the jail, reconfigure medical and segregation, and add new facility capacity, would that it's beginning to become a point of discussion that we need to begin more seriously.
So there's nothing in the future that's going to force it? Like there's not like 5 years you're out of compliance with federal government, whatever, anything like that?
No, and the only federal government requirements on the jail come when we have federal inmates. So otherwise we fall under state guidelines, and we far exceed Oregon state guidelines. We are an active participant of the Sheriff's Association, a statewide association for Oregon jail standards, which were measured. Our jail is measured annually by every other year against 309 standards that are far beyond what Oregon statutes provide for. So facility-wise, it's really a local issue, but it does impact our care and management options.
Commissioner Farr, do you want to make?
So, do you expect at the end of next fiscal year to still have a yearly? We do. We're anticipating a $19 million annual expense against the levy, and our reserve we expect to close the year close to 20 as of March. As of March 31, we were estimating a $20 million reserve rolling forward. So we're a little above a one-year operating reserve, but in coming years there'll be some probably growth to the budget that should balance out.
Commissioner? In terms of down the road, quite a ways, do you envision the Lane County being involved with other counties or cities within Lane County to construct a more regional facility as the number of mentally ill people in the jail increases, and then these smaller communities or smaller jurisdictions can't really provide those kinds of correction services to those people? Do you envision that down the road, and is there any discussion of that involving Lynn and Benton County or the communities in Eugene and Springfield?
Right. So there's not actively any conversation about joining efforts to create a regional facility in this area. There is one called Norcor up in the Dalles that's shared by 4 or 5 sheriff's offices. Actually, what I envision is our community finding a way to treat the mentally ill and manage the community's mental illness outside of the criminal justice system, and to remove the people from the jail that don't need to be there except for criminal behavior caused because of a crisis through their illness. We're still going to always have mentally ill people in our jail. We'll never have an absolute elimination. I get that. But I can give you numbers of cases where there are people in the jail, many of them very simple misdemeanors, because law enforcement responds to a person with mental illness in crisis in this community, and they do not have resources locally that are outside of the criminal justice system to transport that person for care and treatment to stabilize them out of crisis. And because of the behavior while in crisis, police officers are able to say, well, that's disorderly conduct because they were in the street naked blocking traffic. That meets the definition of disorderly conduct under Oregon law. We can arrest them, drive them to the county jail, and it's no longer the problem of a deputy sheriff working patrol, a state trooper, or a city police officer. It's their only resolution. It's not their first choice, but they have no other options, often. And so these folks then are introduced to the criminal justice system, often for the first time, sometimes repeatedly, only because of behavior that would not exist if their mental illness was adequately managed. And our community, across the country, our communities are unable or unwilling to find a way to more humanely manage this population, so they end up becoming the de facto mental health facility of a county jail. And that's my vision, is we don't do that anymore. And then we won't have the need for 600 jail beds. We might actually not have to release people from jail because we're not consuming the capacity with people that shouldn't be in our jail. It's not exactly what you asked.
Yeah, well, it's certainly relevant, because if the goal of a wise government would be, why are we putting these people in jail in the first place? Why don't we deal with it there? I hope that we can do better in our budget process to get us to that goal.
And not every sheriff in Oregon is in the same position that I am as far as resources. Mm-hmm. Benton County Jail is under-resourced, and they're struggling, and they're looking for options currently. I don't know if there would make sense for us to communicate with Benton County and try to find a regional facility that, arguably they would want it in Corvallis, I would want it in Eugene. Somewhere in between on the county line isn't convenient for either. So there's those kinds of logistical considerations. Lynn County's jail doesn't suffer capacity issues, and so Sheriff Riley probably isn't excited about having a conversation with me about sharing my capacity issues with him who doesn't have any. Mm-hmm. So it's not as easy as just picking a neighbor and identifying how we create something. Their needs are different than ours. So there's not anything I see in the future regionally that we would move toward.
Thank
you. Okay. Earlier I posed the question Is there interest in the group to have the sheriff pursue and come back what he might do with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 newly allocated positions? Other than the heartache I'm causing you and Christine of the budget committee, is there wherewithal to consider that?
I was kind of the one that had the leading questions about that, because I do have my eye on a possible funding stream, but I would like to get some of the ideas he has about how he'd use it, because I want to know what benefit it has, because I would be taking money from Peter to pay Paul.
Okay.
And I also need to hear from Peter about what impact the reduction in budget has, which we haven't had the folks from the road fund in here yet. That's where I was looking for a possible source. So I want to hear from them about what their plans were for those funds too. But I am very interested in understanding, what it would do for patrol and for that early intervention. We talked about, we had EMP in here and talked about their high-risk population, because we're waiting to arrest people till they're on their 10th, 20th, 30th offense, versus having more patrol out there and arresting people earlier in their criminal careers and maybe having a lower risk profile of our offenders we're managing. There's all sorts of benefits. But I kind of like to understand, what, for that. I worked it out. If you funded it for 5 years, it'd be about $4.42 million. Based on a 3% annual CPI on that. What's 4.242? If I could set that aside, you knew you had that 5 years of funding, like you knew you had 5 years of funding for the jail under the when the levy passed. What benefit does that have? And then I also need to think about, if I try and patch together $4.42 million for you, what's the negative impact of that? So, but of course, I need to weigh those. So if I don't know what the positives are, I'm not weighing the negatives against anything. So I'd like to see us at least get some answers from the sheriff's office about what they would do with 6 more, somewhere between 0 to 6 FTE.
Yeah, I think in real quickly, in a brief consultation with our command group and looking at that, I think our default at this point would be they would probably be assigned to patrol for the reasons we spoke of earlier. I think we would, first of all, that first year, we're not going to have those positions filled. We're hiring, based on jail experience, we're hiring we're filling 10 deputy positions a year. And so there's going to be, and a brand new deputy assigned to patrol takes 11 months before they're driving their own patrol car. So we're a full year before we start staffing any of those. We'll be filling them, paying for them while we're training them for a year. It's going to take 4 to 6 months to get people hired and those kinds of things. We do transfer from the jail, so we'll have staff available to make those reassignments as we can process them. But there's not, so I guess part of my hesitation is to over-deliver. I want to make sure that the budget committee understands that we don't turn this on July 1 and we have 6 more deputies. And so during that first year, there will be little to no direct impact that's visible, except to the budget. And then in the subsequent years, then we will start seeing the impacts of having those staff deployed. And I think as we've talked through it, it makes sense to initially deploy those to patrol, to try to add a deputy per shift as much as possible. And we will continue to evaluate if that's the most appropriate assignment of that resource as we move forward over that period of time. I still struggle with being able to come up with the definitive answer of exactly what will 1 more deputy per shift do, as far as does that move us up the bar of now we'll go to misdemeanor property crimes? I mean, I can't answer that until we have some time, which is going to be down the road a ways, to really see what pressures that relieves from the existing patrol group by adding 1 more to the mix. I could tell you that in our most, well, it's a little older now, that when we had the Police Executive Research Forum come in 4 or 5 years ago, 5 or 6 years ago maybe, they then told us, and I don't really think things have changed much, that we need to have 30 deputies in our patrol before we can effectively meet the call demand for the calls of service we're currently responding to. And so this puts us right there. And we're at 25 today. You add 6, we're, what's that, 31? So we're close, but all that does is, according to the PERF study that analyzed our man-hour demand by call for service, it says with this number of deputies, we should meet that now. That didn't add in.
Say you're going to be doing traffic enforcement.
That didn't add in new police service or additional call response or traffic enforcement. So there will be more traffic. You put more 6 deputies out there. There's 6 more times. There's 1 more time a shift that somebody's going to run across a violation that needs to be addressed. I even do that twice a year. So it will increase traffic enforcement just marginally, just by the nature of having 1 more uniformed deputy out there doing his job. So I think based on what we know from that PERF analysis that this will put us where they recommend we be to, based on our call service response at our current level. And we might be able to eke a little more out of that and say, well, now we can add in a little bit more beyond the threshold we're currently. But that's where I struggle, is how do we define exactly where that is? I think this brings us to where we should be staffed for what we're currently answering.
Yeah, and I think just one of the limitations on the source I'm looking at specifically talks about being able to use federal forest funds for rural patrol, so we may not be able to fund detectives with it anyway.
Right.
So that's, as we look at that particular source. But I'm looking forward to having our discussion on the road fund side and understanding what their plans were. Also, it may be that there's really not wiggle room to go there, but we have been using the $800,000 a year out of the road fund forest payments and transferring it into patrol as is. That's how we kind of got back to 24-hour. So, we'll see when we talk about roads where we are. But I just kind of wanted to. I'd be interested in continuing to have the discussion. I don't know about if we have 4 people that are.
Before I leave the answer that I gave you, is there any addition from the chief deputy?
I just add that the first thing that both of our patrol commanders said, the immediate benefit is in our existing staff officers. So 1 more personnel per shift makes the guys that are already today more likely to have cover closer to their opportunity. And that is, when you go downstairs to the patrol briefing, that's huge. So
So are there 4 people that are interested in pursuing this, or should we take 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 proponents? But again, based on what you just said, perhaps this is input for next year's budget in reality.
Or, well, I was going to say, what the sheriff is telling you is would impact this year's budget, but the service level probably wouldn't change for almost a year.
Right.
It would slowly change, just like the jail. We didn't open 367 beds when the levy passed.
Right. And the good news to this is we wouldn't be drawing those revenues away from the road fund account unless we were using them. So it's not like we would be transferring and building.
Yeah. So my 4.42 was probably the high end of an estimate. It'd probably be much less than that funded for 5 years.
Okay.
I would add on that I'm really looking for something that can continue. So I need some 5-year path, and it's obviously.
I would just be curious, along with that, what impact it would have on your jail services like mental health, if they're already overwhelmed, if just arresting more is gonna,
Yeah. I don't know that adding 1 deputy per shift would be that substantial of an impact, especially if we're not adding new crime response to our daily routine. We're just simply maintaining the line, but we have more availability to be there quicker and more effective, and occasionally put more effort toward a neighborhood problem that today we just can't do. However, like we've said all the way through our rebuild effort of our system, is that 6 more deputies are going to put that many more cases in front of district attorneys' evaluation and review for prosecution. So there'll be a little impact there. There will be a little impact to the jail, both because of the probable cause initial arrest and the pretrial detention and potential sentenced offenders to the county jail that come from prosecution. So all of those things will have impacts. I do think this is a small enough number of law enforcement addition that it's not going to have a measurable or visible impact to either the jail or the DA's office. But there certainly is going to be something that will edge upward on both of those services.
Okay. Any other discussion with the Sheriff's Office? Any other committee business? We are on tomorrow.
1:30, we might just add that this is the day that CDBG Council is right before us, so there's a chance we won't be live right at 1:30, but it should be close.
So 1:30
Is the planned start.
plan.
Yes.
Okay. All right. See you tomorrow. We're adjourned.
Yeah.